Hello and good evening. Tonight's gentle journey takes us to a guide to Chinese occultism. Lower the volume, rest your eyes, and let the past be your lullaby. If this brings you peace, consider liking and subscribing only if it truly helps. And share in the comments where you're joining us from and the hour there, now, lights down, a soft fan if you have one, and let's begin our walk through history. Here is our starting truth in China. What the West often calls occult, seldom hid in shadows, it stood in the open, spoken in palaces and tea shops, inscribed on shells, sung at festivals. Emperors consulted omens with the same gravity as councils of estate. Taoist adepts distilled elixirs by mountain streams. Villagers asked blessings from city gods and dragon kings whose tablets shared space with family ancestors. Alchemy, divination, spirit communication, protective magic. These were parts of public order as much as private hope. The Chinese past did not set the mysterious apart. It set it to work. We'll follow that current across 3 millennia from the bonfires of the Shang to Han courts glittering with wonder workers, from medieval mountains where recluses refined breath and minerals, to Qing parlors where ghost stories braided moral wit with marvels, then outward into regional rites that will still thrum in southern storefront shrines and northern village temples. This is a guide, not a checklist. We'll walk at a pace gentle enough to feel why these practices seemed necessary and how the visible and the invisible were folded into one cloth of meaning. To keep our bearings, we'll travel with a small company of guides. At the threshold, a Shang priest warms a turtle shell until it speaks, and the king takes that as speech for policy. In the brilliant, perilous middle, Emperor Wu of Han opens his court to alchemists and diviners, seeking heaven's favor and perhaps a longer life. In the south, the scholar Ge Hong retires to mountains and composes the Bao Puzi, arguing that salvation is a craft ethics, discipline, medicine, talismans, and experiment braided together. In the late imperial centuries, the storyteller Pu Songling gathers foxes and ghosts into strange tales, where righteous magic and human folly keep company by candlelight. Along the road, we'll pause for regional voices, spirit mediums in the coastal south who bleed charms in red, ritual masters of the north who keep the village calendar and drive out plague with masks and swords, and we will end by stepping onto sacred peaks where hermits sawed the long breath of the Tao. Before we move, a compact map of terms. Occult, in this telling, means arts that read or influence the unseen pattern, divination by bones, stalks, stars, alchemy both external metals, elixirs, and internal breath, visualization, spirit communication through mediums, dreams, and the spirit writing, talismans, exorcisms, geomancy, auspicious timing. Some arts belonged to professionals, many were social habit. The crucial difference from much of Europe is not that China lacked prohibitions, but that such arts, when aligned with an ethical cosmos, could be normative. The empire's task was not to bury them, but to harness, regulate, and when panic swelled, restrain them. Secrecy existed, recipes guarded, lineages curated, failures buried, but the striking feature is how openly these arts met governance and scholarship. Think of the Shang king asking ancestors about a river crossing, the Zhou theorist naming the mandate of heaven, Han, astronomers mapping portents, Song literati writing elegant rubrics for rites, village associations keeping the temple accounts, and hiring a ritual master when plague walked the lanes. The occult here is neither wholly private nor merely outrageous. It sits near the center of social order, answering questions that statistics and courts could not. Because stories live best in scenes, we'll travel by pictures. We will sit beside a brazier at Anyang and watch a polished plastron web with fissures like frost on glass. We will climb a wind-bitten terrace on Mount Tai and feel banners lean toward the sky. We will step into a narrow shop in Fujian where a medium's breath turns ragged and a deity borrows his voice. We will lean over Songling's desk in Shandong and hear a narrator whisper that sometimes the mad beggar is the immortal you needed. And in the mountains, we will see a lone lamp in a cave mouth at dawn, the drip of water, the soft rasp of someone counting breaths. You may wonder how we will keep our footing between empathy and skepticism. The answer is simple. We will listen inside the frame people used. When a Shang diviner pronounced a crack auspicious, he worked within a disciplined method. Questions recorded, outcomes checked. When Emperor Wu honored the Great One or fasted from grains, he moved inside a cosmology where heaven signaled approval, where substances and breaths corresponded with the stars. When Gehong warned that elixirs kill the unprepared, he spoke the language of craft risk, not fairy tale. Our measure will be coherence within their world. Our question, what work did each practice do? We will also keep the costs in sight. Pursuits of immortality poisoned more seekers than they saved. Panics about unseen malice can sweep a court into execution and exile. Fraud rides in the wake of hope. Our aim is not to tidy these edges, nor to revel in them, but to dwell in the tension that made Chinese occultism endure its promise of order and healing, its temptation toward excess and fear. That tension explains why rulers alternately sponsored and suppressed such arts, why alchemy flourished in one decade, and dolls with curses were hunted in the next. If these names are new, we will keep them friendly. Gehong will be our practical mentor. Skeptical of shortcuts? Plain about danger. Songling, our genial collector, will treat foxes and ghosts as neighbors with lessons. Emperor Wu, our cautionary tale, will show how power amplifies hope and panic alike. And the Shang kings will remind us that from the start, Chinese statecraft and spiritcraft were siblings, not strangers. Along the way, we will meet village mediums, hereditary ritual masters, temple accountants, and mountain hermits, the ordinary custodians of extraordinary things. If you stay to the end, you'll hold your own in a conversation about Chinese occult traditions. Perhaps even surprise someone who assumed this world was all taboo. We'll keep the history straight and let it breathe, because accuracy is only half the work. The other half is mood, the slow turn of a lantern until shapes deepen. One last map of terms. Divination is bones and shells. Yes, but also yarrow stalks and hexagrams, hours and directions chosen before a house is raised or a grave is set. Alchemy is both recipes that smell of minerals and exercises that smell of pine and sweat. Spirit communication ranges from orderly spirit writing to trance a medium, bleeding a charm in red and the speaking with another voice. And a final picture, a northern village festival where a ritual master ties on a mask and the stepped pattern his father taught. Miles away, a diaspora temple hangs neon over wooden gods, And the shopkeeper leaves oranges because old home and new home still share the same sky. So when we say occult, we are not peeking through a keyhole. We are stepping into a public room. We will sit with kings and potters, generals and mediums, exam scholars and mountain recluses. We will read bones and poems, recipes and court edicts. We will avoid the cheap thrill, choosing instead the warmth of understanding, the logic inside the wonder, and the tenderness inside the logic. If you are joining us from a sleepless city or a quiet village, from midnight or mid-afternoon, know this, the pace will stay slow. The past is not in a hurry. Let its voices murmur while you rest. And when a crack spreads across the surface of an old plastron and someone claims to hear an ancestor in it, try to imagine how persuasive that sound once was in a world where storms and suns and battles could turn on a breath. Tonight is not a trial, it is a walk. Our next step takes us to the Shang court at Anyang, to the workshop where shells and shoulder blades are drilled, polished, and anointed with heat. We will stand beside the brazier, we will watch the crack, we will learn to read it. Night, over Anyang, the royal precinct exhales a low heat. In a courtyard, there smells of ash and damp earth. A workbench waits beneath lacquered lamps. On it, a turtle plastron, polished until the surface gleams like pale moonstone. Beside it, an ox shoulder blade, its edges trimmed a square, bronze awls, burins, and a slender brand rest in a neat line. A scribe unrolls a bamboo slip and wets his brush. The king is coming. This is pyro-osteomancy, bone divination by fire, the quintessential art of the Shang. If the word sounds technical, the action is simple, the question is carved, the bone is heated, the crack speaks. But everything around that simplicity is cared for with ritual precision, because the stakes are not parlor riddles. They are the weather for the harvest, the safety of a birth, the course of a river, the timing of a hunt, the fate of a campaign. In the Shang world, the king is not merely a ruler. He is the household voice to the ancestors, the one who asks and answers. Preparation begins long before the king's footfall. The artisans thin the plastron from within, scraping away honeycomb until the inside hollows to a uniform depth. On the scapula, they plane away ridges and, with the patience of clockmakers, shave the bone into a clear field. Then come the pits, shallow scoops drilled along a line, like a row of tiny moons. These are stress points for the heat. Some are for yes, some for no, some for alternative outcomes, because a good question is not a wish. It is a choice that can be measured. The scribe's brush writes the charge in neat, upright characters, the date by sexagenary cycle, the diviner's name, the query itself, on the coming Jiashen day. Will it be auspicious to call the troops east if we sacrifice a black ox to grandfather Jia? Will the rains come? Will the queen's delivery be safe? The knife follows, incising the script so the words live in the bone. These inscriptions, which archaeologists will one day lift from tombs by the tens of thousands, make the invisible legible, not magic scribble, but record-keeping for a state that has learned to bind uncertainty to a surface. Now the king enters. Sometimes he himself will prognosticate. Sometimes a high ritual specialist will read on his behalf. A brazier glows. The brand heats until its tip blooms dull orange. A hush. The diviner sets the bone, presses the hot tip into the first pit. A dry, intimate sound answers tick. Then a narrow fissure darts across the surface, as quick and delicate as a winter crack racing across ice. One after another, the pits are touched. One after another, the bone speaks in tiny earthquakes. The diviner leans close, reading angle, depth, the way an archer reads wind. The scribe notes auspicious, ominous, no harm. Sometimes carved afterward, a concise gloss appears. Cracked by so-and-so. The king prognosticated it will rain. At first glance, this looks like fortune-telling, but listen to the structure. The inquiry is framed, the options are drilled, the results are labeled, the event to come is later verified. Many bones carry a final line. Verification, it rained on the Xinyu day, or verification 3 days, no wind. The Shang court was not simply petitioning, it was built in a memory. The cracks laid down a climatology, a ledger of hunts gone well and raids gone badly, births that carried, fevers that broke. The ancestors delivered the omen, but the chancery keeps a score. Crack reading, in other words, is a technology of governance. What kinds of questions are worthy of heat? Nearly everything that matters, warfare first, because Shang kings are war leaders and bone oracles are a general's instrument. When to move, whether to cross, which direction holds the luck, these are weighed in a discipline that formalizes courage. Agriculture next, because the soil is the empire's breath. Will frost strike the mulberry? Should we pray for rain at the river bank? Ritual is never far. Should the sacrifice be an ox or a sheep? To which ancestor is this offering most fitting? The body intervenes in all this, as bodies do. Will the queen bear a son? Will the fever in the prince abate? Even petty ailments rise to the surface, because a dynasty is a family on which many families depend. If you stand close, you will notice a choreography. On A cracks the clean, right-leaning branches that experienced eyes favor, the diviner tends to speak with confidence. On B cracks awkward, split. The heat spent too fast, he hesitates. The layout itself hints at the interpretive scheme, a series of positive pits, one way, negative the other, so that the field is a kind of yes-no abacus. The king's voice matters here. In many inscriptions, he makes the judgment auspicious, not auspicious. Harm, no harm, there will be harvest. The child will be safe. Contrary to some modern fantasies of trance alone, the Shang practice is as much sober reading as it is sacred thrill, a disciplined look at a patterned surface, conducted in full view of a court whose livelihoods turn on the decision. To imagine the memory of this labor, picture a shelf of finished scapula and plastrons, each washed with ink to darken the writing, each tagged by day and case. A steward knows this archive, can retrieve old cases of drought and answer whether such a crack pattern proved true when the river fell this low. Across the years, this reading becomes a habit of mind. The world speaks in fissures if you know where to look. An omen is not a thunderbolt except to the untrained. It is a recordable, reviewable sign to be paired with action and later tested by harvest tallies and casualty lists. We are used to opposing religion and bureaucracy. The Shang do not. The very materials tell you that. The oracle object is both sacrament and file. The court that sacrifices is the court that stores, dates, and verifies. Divination is thus not a side practice, but an office. A Shang king rules not because he prefers the ancestors, but because he proves he can hear them in an orderly way and translate that hearing into policy. Even terminology betrays the integration, the word for two divine lives in the script itself, a radical that will persist for millennia. The map of power includes this table, these tools, this quiet room. The method's austerity allows for texture too. The workshop has sounds, a scraping bone to a uniform thinness makes a whisper like silk. The drilling of pits ticks like beetles on wood. The first application of heat sings a quick, bright note. The fifth, a duller one, because bone fatigues. The air smells of marrow and ash. A boy apprentice learns to align the rows to keep the spacing exact so that cracks are legible, not chaotic. His master teaches a small superstition: tap the brand twice against the brazier rim before the first crack, but scolds him if his hand wavers. Piety and technique coexist, rubbing shoulders like colleagues. None of this hoists the practice beyond doubt. Bones can fracture strangely. Heat can be applied too hard or too late. A scribe can misnote. A diviner can overtrust a pretty branch. The Shang know this. They amortize error by repetition, by keeping many cases, by carving verifications that bind later memory to earlier confidence. When the outcome contradicts the prognostication, that too becomes a lesson, an entry in a silent debate between forebears and weather. And what of the crowd beyond the palace fence? The potters. The carters, do they feel bound to this ritual? Yes, and not only because policy follows omen, the calendar of sacrifices touches every household. The harvest festivals and prayers for rain pour into the alleys. The king's questions are everyone's questions, writ larger. If the oracle says the east road is lucky, caravans swelling that way will enrich some and starve others. If the oracle says the flooding will be severe, the brickmakers will be busy. The crack line is a tide line. When dawn climbs the palace eaves, the brand cools. The scribe wipes his brush. The king withdraws. The plastron carries its fine spidering. It will rest with its siblings until a day comes when a clerk, anxious about clouds rolling up from the horizon, sends for cases on rain and runs his finger along earlier winters. In that quiet administrative act, you can glimpse what makes Shang divination so historically durable. It is not a theatrical exception to governance. It is governance, asked politely of heaven and handled with files. From here, we step outward into the worldview that makes this room make sense, a cosmos ordered by ancestors and powers, with blessings and disasters as messages, not accidents, a world in which sacrifice, omen, and authority loop into one another. Before we meet the mediums and the priest generals, we will meet the spirits they serve and the queen who served them too. At the Shang court, the crack of bone is not a parlor stunt. It is a way of speaking into a world inhabited, layered, and attentive. Above the living king stands Shangdi, the High Lord, and beneath him a hierarchy of ancestors who are not gone, but proximally near, the older branches of the same tree. Nothing important happens by accident. A good harvest, a fever breaking, a storm rising out of clear air, each is a message. And messages demand replies. The estate is thus a conversation, and ritual is the grammar. Within that grammar, the offerings are sentences of weight. Animals, sheep, pigs, oxen go first, and their blood oils the hinge that swings between worlds. On rare and terrible occasions, a human life is included. because the living sometimes pay in their own coin when the balance seems dangerously off. Even to speak this aloud tells you something about the stakes. One does not trim the sails of fate with dainty thread. But sacrifice is not only appeasement, it is courtesy, obligation, reciprocity, honoring the chain of persons that extends from the king back to the founding dead. The altar is the throne room's twin. Inscriptions from divination shells say it plainly when they ask, "Will grandfather so-and-so accept?" The dead are addressed by name and rank. They accept or decline. They show favor or displeasure by rain or wind, by birth or loss. If they are pleased, it will be known. If they are angry, it will be known more swiftly. This is why the Shang calendar is a busy braid of supplications and thanks. The year is punctuated by set days for certain ancestors, by fasts and libations, by the careful choice of offerings matched to occasion and tone. The people outside the palace feel the rhythm at festivals, but inside, ritual is work budgeted, scheduled, audited by omens. The world, like a bell, rings true when struck correctly. Then there is the figure whose name is written with two simple strokes in the old script, Wu, a spirit medium, shaman. The word would later acquire shades of scorn or wonder depending on the dynasty and the commentator. But in the Shang setting, it is a role as clear and necessary as a scribe or general. The Wu are those who cross the threshold. Some will sway and sing into trance, bodies loose as reeds. Some will beat a steady rhythm and wait for the breathing to change. Some will read sky signs at dawn, assigning meanings to the wanderings of Venus. Some will circle a ritual field calling for clouds, lifting a scoop of water to mimic the desired rain. Always there is a movement between registers, the bright of the courtyard here, the low hush there, a hand held out, a hand received. It is easy to imagine the Wu as a single type, but the bones and bronzes argue for variety. The presence of the Wu sign in inscriptions does not dictate a uniform method. It announces a profession within which methods bloom like regional dialects. Rainmaking in one valley may be paired with the burial of a dragon-shaped talisman. In another, a Wu will polish a mirror and watch for cloud forms. Somewhere a Wu casts a handful of grains, reading their fall like fishermen read ripples. Somewhere else a Wu dances until sweat runs, the body itself turned into a message drum. The king listens to these readers of texture as he listens to the cracks, because the world, to Shang eyes, is textured with intention. The assumption that women are at the margin of such work collapses the moment we step into a certain tomb. Her name is Fu Hao, consort to King Wu Ding, who bears titles that make easy categories squirm: wife and general, mother and high priestess. From the earth came her chamber, heavy with bronzes, jades, weapons, and tellingly more than 500 oracle bones inscribed from rituals entrusted to her. This is not a token presence. This is a dossier of authority. The inscriptions show that when the king needed particular favor from royal ancestors, he sometimes asked Fu Hao to conduct the rite. The path between living and dead, in other words, was not a corridor the king walked alone. It is worth pausing here, letting the light fall across her to feel the size of that fact. If you imagined a world in which the shamanic and the martial could not share a single body, Fu Hao answers with a balanced sword and a ritual ladle. If you imagined women only mourning at the edges of power, she steps into the center as officiant. The tomb tells you something else too, that the Shang concept of ritual competence is practical, not decorative. Whoever can set the tone that causes heaven to answer, male or female, king or consort, should be asked to set it. Efficacy is the ethic. Consider a day when she is summoned. The divination has spoken in favor of a river crossing, but the omens advise a specific ancestor's blessing, and the king commands that Fu Hao petition. The ceremonial distance from chamber to altar is measured with precision. Her dress and ornaments are chosen by rule, not whim. Incense smokes, a quiet drum keeps time, the skin is stretched so fine it snaps softly at each stroke. She raises the cup and calls the name, blood warming in the bowl. If trance comes, it does not come with a spectacle. It arrives as a subtle realignment of breathing, as if a gust has turned in a different valley. She speaks the petition, her voice steady. Those watching in silence feel the hairs lifting along their arms. There's a way a room feels when a prayer hits its mark, and those who live by ritual learn to recognize it. Behind the scenes poise is a blunt calculus. If the king prefers efficiency to dogma, this is because the cosmos is not sentimental. Crops fail for lack of rain, borders shift, sons die. Misfortune does not spare the pious as a reward for form alone. The Shang respond not by abandoning ceremony, but by sharpening it into a tool. Sacrifices become tests as much as gifts. We offer this. Are you listening? Divination becomes a ledger rather than a thrill. We judged it auspicious. Now we record if heaven agreed. The Wu become technicians of crossing, liaisons between registers tempered by long craft. Fu Hao is the proof that craft seeks skill wherever it finds it. If we step back from the individuals into the cosmology itself, the picture clears a tiered universe, but not a distant one. Heaven is lofty but not mute. The ancestors are exalted but not unreachable. Spirits of land and river attend their honors. The royal house stands as hinge for the whole when the king keeps rhythm. The large machine hums. When he loses it, the teeth grind. Disaster, in this view, is not random. It is feedback. The earth does not merely behave, it responds. You can see how such an outlook leans toward constant labor. Harmony is not a prize won once, but a balance that needs daily hands. The calendar, therefore, is a maintenance schedule as much as a liturgical year offerings at fixed intervals, fasts adjusted for weather, supplementary rites when the signs grow noisy. The Wu are forecasters and mechanics of the unseen, checking pressure in the lines. If rains lag, pots are set in the ritual field, meant to catch what heaven will return. If a fever haunts the palace, a sequence of cool offerings replaces a sequence of hot. If a prince's birth approaches, omens narrow to window and hour. From the outside, this can look like a blizzard of rules. From the inside, it is relief. In a world where flood and drought can erase a generation's work, a schedule of gestures that gives one the feeling of co-authoring events is not superstition, but solace and, often enough, effective coordination. When a whole community moves grain because an omen was unfavorable, they may avoid a mud road not for mystical reasons, but because the omen tracks a real seasonality that courtiers, by long record, have recognized. The ancestors, in that sense, are models built of memory and love. They speak with one voice, so the living can. There are costs, and the Shang know them. A ritual can be poorly chosen, an omen misread, an ancestor's name invoked with careless mouth. The universe, conceived as responsive, also becomes prosecutorial if misfortune follows. You deserved it, or at least failed to head it off. This is one reason the roles are so carefully taught. Apprentices of the Wu watch for years before they touch a drum in public. Scribes learn that a crooked character can misname an ancestor. The king knows that to pronounce auspicious too lightly is to invite correction. Ritual is a school that fails its sloppiest students. At the human center of this discipline, Fu Hao stands like a reassurance. Authority does not rest solely on a throne if a right calls for another's hand. After she is gone, her tomb will keep speaking. The bronze axes whisper of campaigns. The jades murmur of rank. The bones, incised with questions and outcomes, record the steady pressure she applied to the seam between living and dead. In those bones, you can hear a larger voice too, the voice of a society that believed its women could be entrusted with power when they proved its forms, and that the most intimate labor in the empire was not fought with spears alone, but with cups, chants, silence, and nerve. Now the court lifts its eyes beyond Anyang. The techniques and assumptions that live at the capital do not stop at the palace wall. They travel with vassal lords and their own ritual specialists. And in time, the logic of asking and answering with heaven will survive political changes dressed in new garments. Before we trace that spread, we'll let the light out of this chamber and follow the road east, where a scapula and plastrand crack in lesser halls, and then forward in time, where the Zhou adopt and refit the same conversation under a new mandate. The language of omen, so carefully kept in bone, will migrate into books, but its heartbeat will remain the same. The road east from Anyang runs past kiln smoke and millet fields, and with it travels a habit, bones packed in baskets, tools wrapped in cloth, a memory of fire that speaks. In lesser halls, the benches are humbler, the bronze thinner, but the questions are the same. A vassal lord wants to know if the ford will hold after rain. A village headman asks whether a daughter's fever will turn. A steward, careful and proud, keeps 3 scapulae from last winter's drought because the pattern they wore sharp, clean. Right-leanings seem to meet heaven halfway. The capital is not the only mouth that speaks upward. It is simply the largest. Archaeologists will one day find the evidence in the earth like echoes, inscribed plastrands and the scapulae in Shandong and Henan. The script clean enough to carry a voice across 30 centuries. The diffusion is not a rumor, it is a practice made portable by skill. Artisans leave the shadow of the great court and hire their hands in smaller seats. Family lines of ritual specialists trained sons and nephews in the thinning of bone, the drilling of pits, the patient way of heat. In some places, the archive is a chest tucked into a storeroom. In others, it is an old scribe's memory, sharp as a thorn. There, too, the yes and no are balanced by verification. We judged it auspicious. The rain came, or we judged it harmful. No harm was seen. The habit is what matters. A polity learns to index its luck. We tend to imagine the Shang world as the king's alone, but the logic that ties omen to action thrives wherever risk is shared. A hamlet set low along a riverbank becomes attentive to flood. A hamlet set high where the winds are cruel, becomes attentive to frost. In one, bones are heated before the decision to move piglets to higher pens. In the other, before the sowing is shifted a week. Ritual here is not lavish, but it is precise. The Wu in the countryside has fewer jades, but a better ear for the local sky. Then the dynasty ends. Courts do not last, but techniques do. The Zhou rise in the west and come bearing their own grammar of rule, and with it a theory that will overhang Chinese politics like a sky, the mandate of heaven. Where Shang kings spoke most often to named ancestors under the high deity, the Zhou will lean their speech toward Tian heaven not as a cold vault, but as moral weather, a judge whose approvals and rebukes are written into the seasons. The story told about the fall of the Shang is thus not only a story of armies, it is a story of science luxuries abound while hunger spreads. Storms arrive off rhythm. Eclipses stain the day. These are heaven's remonstrances, the warrant by which a new house can claim the right to steady the world. The continuity, however, is as important as the change. Ancestors do not vanish with a new banner. They reappear under new names and emphases, offerings set on new altars built to the same measurements. The old grammar of asking and answering remains, but many questions are now framed within a written ethic that climbs toward principle. The Shang had files, the Zhou will have books about files. In ritual, manuals, and ceremonial law, you can hear the practice that once crowded a workshop now taught as a curriculum. How to select a day, how to space an altar, how to address heaven and earth, mountains and rivers, the city and its dead. And divination itself takes a turn from bone to stalk. Milfoil yarrow light, jointed, quick to the touch, becomes the tool by which chance is counted and patterns read, instead of a fisher darting across a plastron. A diviner now stands with 50 stalks gathered from the field, dividing and counting them in cycles, building numbers that resolve into a hexagram of broken and solid lines. Where the bone crack was a single branch to interpret, the hexagram is a lattice, 6 lines stacked into a code that can vary not only in form but in motion, this line changing, that one firm, so that the result is not merely yes or no, but the story about how yes becomes no, or how no becomes yes, depending on the time. If the bone oracle felt like listening for a voice, the yarrow oracle feels like watching a tide. The text that grows around this practice does something quietly radical. It makes omen portable, not only as object, but as literature. The judgments and images attached to each hexagram short, gnomic, sometimes as plain as a proverb, sometimes as mysterious as fog, prime the mind to think in correspondences. This hexagram to the taming of oxen, that one to a swamp below a sky, another to a young fox whose tail gets wet at the ford. A literate class can now sit miles from any temple and consult the same core images, the same advice. A magistrate in a border county rises before dawn, sets his stalks, counts, and reads perseverance furthers. A mother, shaking in the dark over a child's cough, seeks a neighbor who keeps the book, and he says, "Wait for the western wind." Skeptics will say the images are vague. Practitioners will reply that life is not a switch, but a weather pattern. The value lies in the way a mind, sharpened by practice, can use a hexagram to frame choices and measure the patience of time. If you stand inside a Zhou suburban altar where heaven is honored under the open sky, the continuity with Anyang is palpable. There is still a schedule, still a correct pairing of offering and occasion, still a record to keep. But you notice a new shade remonstrance. Officials keep lists of anomalies, earthquakes, comets, unseasonal frosts, and present them as portents. A ruler's virtue here is not a pious pose, but a variable that modulates the world's increased cruelty, and the alarm bells in nature ring louder. Repent, and the bells soften. A court historian will dare to write, after a drought, that the state's levies have been too harsh. The report is not rebellion, it is a work of repair, offered in the belief that heaven and the people breathe through one reed. The everyday craft adjusts as well, where a Shang diviner drilled positive and negative pits. A Zhou diviner weighs which lines are moving and which are still, whether to read the primary hexagram or the resulting one, which line statement to heed. Calendrics fatten with scholarship. Astronomers in rooftop towers mark risings and settings. Analysts tighten the screws of chronology so that an omen can be compared to past omens in the same season, under the same stars. A village still heats bones, sometimes old habits die hard, but the prestige now belongs to those who can read a page and a sky together. A scene, then, in a small Zhou county seat. A dispute over a dike. The barley needs the water. The hamlets downstream fear a breach. The magistrate convenes elders. They air the facts, and then, as if to sweeten the air, the magistrate performs a divination with yarrow. The result speaks of containment and release, danger at the beginning, success if one crosses the great river at the right time. He pairs the judgment with a reading of the clouds and the knowledge that 2 days hence the wind will soften. He sets a schedule today. Repair, tomorrow, open, on the 3rd day, close and watch. The elders nod, not because the stocks alone decided, but because the ritual framed a compromise and reminded them all that taming is a craft. If you prefer the countryside, a different scene, a family has chosen a site for a grave on a hill that looks south. An old man with a bamboo tube of tools walks the slope, noting the veins of rock, the curl of a stream, the way a pine leans as if pointing. He is not yet a feng shui master in the form the term will later take, but his eye for orientation comes from the same habit of reading the earth as a living partner. He taps the ground and says, "Not here too hungry a wind." He walks 3 paces and says, "Here let the back rest against the turtle's shoulder." The words sound like poetry because poetry is how you keep such things in memory. At the highest altars, a new title fixes the relationship between human and the sky the king as son of heaven. It is as intimate as it is grand, conveying both authority and obligation. The son must listen, and if he stops listening, heaven will make that plain. This is why records thicken, why diviners are kept on payroll, why astronomers have salaries, why, when an eclipse darkens noon, a court will put on plain clothes in shame. The old Shang conviction that the world is responsive remains, but the Zhou embed that conviction into a moral bureaucracy whose ink does not wash off easily. You can feel the estate's shoulders slope under the weight, and you can see why, centuries later, emperors will still court those who promise to read heaven more clearly. In the long view, this chapter is the bridge. The art of cracking bone does not vanish. It is repurposed, remembered, slowly sidelined as the prestige of texts and mathematics grows. The Wu are still called when rain fails, but more often you will find a ritual master with a book and a schedule. The palette widens stalks and stars, omens and portents, images and judgments, manuals and codes. The question is the same one asked under Anyang lamps. What is the pattern, and how do we move within it without breaking the world? The answers are now written as much as they are incised, but the desire to bind uncertainty to a surface and then act remains the empire's steady heartbeat. Ahead of us lies a court where that heartbeat will quicken into spectacle the Han, and an emperor whose hunger for heaven's favor will make his palace a theater of wonders. Before we climb those steps, take one last look at the countryside, at the small altars and the careful hands. Techniques survive dynasties because villages cannot afford to forget. The next dynasty will inherit not only territory, but a way of asking for luck and legitimacy. The bones taught the habit, the books teach the tone. Soon enough, hope will dress itself in brocade. The Han court opens like a painted fan, each rip a bureau, each a silk panel washed with omens. Lanterns rise, drums quiet, and sleeves sweep the floor as the emperor enters. He is Liu Che, later called Emperor Wu, a sovereign convinced that heaven is not only a dome above, but a partner near at hand, and that a patient partner can be courted. He is ambitious enough to push frontiers and superstitious enough to ask the stars for a longer breath. For him, ritual is not decoration, it is a lever. If the right offerings are made, the right abstinences kept, the right names sung at the right time, then heaven might incline, and the empire and the emperor might be strengthened and prolonged. Into this appetite steps a man the records call Li Shaojun, a fangshi, literally a master of techniques, practically a traveling broker of methods. Around 133 BCE, he whispers an old new recipe for favor, honor the stove god with the special rites, so the household fire becomes a gate. Practice grain avoidance fasting, bigu, sealing the mouth against coarse foods and taking in finer airs. Let breath and abstinence cleanse the body of the heavy and make it receptive to heaven's gifts. He cites antique precedent, like a lawyer marshalling case law. The Yellow Emperor fasted. The Yellow Emperor rose. Whether or not the antiquity is exact matters less than the persuasion that a sovereign's body properly tended answers the same rules as the stars and seasons. Ceremony thickens like silk. At Mount Tai, the high table where rulers attempt to stitch earth and the Sigiwu, orders the great Feng and Shan sacrifices. Processions climb the terraces. Banners as stiff as pines. Bronze vessels shining like small moons. On the summit, he performs Feng to honor heaven. At the foothills, he performs Shang to repay earth, twin gestures meant to tie a rein to the cosmos. The rites are ancient in reputation and elastic in meaning. Emperor Wu fills them with a personal hope that orthodoxy, a spectacle, and sincerity braided together will pull the empire into rhythm and, if heaven wills, grant him more years within it. Alongside these public acts comes a private reorientation devotion to Taiyi, the Great One. Taiyi is no local patron. He is a ruler's star, a pole for compass needles. Oracles and almanacs crowd the palace tables. Men trained to read the sky stand on towers with ink-stained sleeves, waiting for clear windows in time. When the heavens consent to a date, the courtyards bloom with lamps, and the emperor moves through them as through a diagram, his body tracing geometry on air. The geometry extends inward. The same logic that draws lines between constellations and calendar also threads the human body into the map of the 5 phases: wood, fire, earth, metal, water, organs, colors, tastes, planets. Minerals all answer to these phases, waxing and waning as the year turns. Inside that coherence, elixirs do not feel like whimsy. Jade is pure, incorruptible, a stone that does not rot. Morning dew is light and new, a distillate of a sky. Crush jade to a fine dust. Take dew collected before sunrise. Let them serve as a tonic that persuades the flesh to imitate the substances that do not decay. The argument is not merely magical, it is correlative like, a strengthens like. Purity calls purity. The small human is tuned by the large world. Experiment, however, is a road lined with cliffs. The court remembers how the emperor himself tried the tonic jade ground to powder. Dew gathered at first light and fell so ill he abandoned it. The story survives because it is emblematic. The path to long life is fogged and narrow, nor is the palace protected from sharper illusions. The taste for wonders draws every sort of adept physicians with recipes, mathematicians with calendars, geomancers with compasses, mediums with wet eyes, conjurers with quick hands. The palace becomes a market of marvels where prudence and greed haggle over the price of hope. Li Shaojun's early favor does more than brighten his own fortunes. It creates a permission structure. If the emperor believes, others will gamble on belief-adjacent performances. One day, a sorcerer stages a spirit apparition that chills onlookers, a screen shivers. A voice blooms from nowhere, a perfume no one recognizes rides the air. Another day, investigators find the pulleys behind the screen, the accomplices in the eaves, the perfume poured on coals. The punishment is swift and public. The message is that heaven may be wooed, but it will not be mocked. It is a dangerous moment to be clever in the wrong way. Why, then, does the emperor go on? Because he is not only collecting wonders, he is building order. A sovereign does not sponsor rites merely to please gods. He lubricates the empire's machine. A Feng sacrifice is trailed by promotions and brimming granaries. A successful omen can justify a dam. A new cult floods the provinces with artisan labor carvers, smiths, silk painters who carry pay home to their markets. Ritual is a stimulus and surveillance, an audit of loyalty dressed as incense. To move through a ceremony with exactness is to demonstrate that one belongs to the same grammar as the throne. The emperor understands that theology and logistics share a corridor. Inside the inner rooms, the quiet work of transformation continues. Ministers keep grain avoidance fasts to prove sincerity. Physicians take pulses and tune breath to the almanac. Talismans are drawn in vermilion and affixed above lintels. The court's correlative thinking that every force answers to a partner breeds a meticulousness that looks to later eyes like superstition and to contemporary eyes like administration. If an eclipse threatens, the emperor changes garments. If Mars treads too near a constellation associated with war, a campaign's departure is delayed. If a river god's temper is rumored to rise, engineers are sent with both shovels and prayers. The same mind that counts regiments counts stars. Why would immortality through alchemy seem plausible to serious men? Because immortality is a generous word. Few imagined a body that never changes. Many hoped for a span extended, a vigor preserved, an ease in breathing that outlasts the usual slope of age. External alchemy pursued this through a substance's cinnabar refined until it seemed to hold a captured sun. Gold tamed and ingested in minute measures to lend its incorruptibility to flesh. Herbs boiled in sequences that mirrored the calendar. Internal methods sought the same end by breath and visualization, circulating qi along paths mapped to constellations, joining the microcosm to the macrocosm without swallowing a single pellet. Between these poles, 1,000 hybrid recipes promised something gentler than eternity: resilience, clarity, a body less porous to misfortune. On festival nights, belief makes beauty. Torches trace corridors of light. Processions carry vessels whose shapes echo constellations. Priests recite phrases measured to drums that keep the empire's heartbeat. The emperor stands within squares and circles, chalked on a stone, the square for earth, the circle for heaven, and pours a thin stream of wine to each direction. A hawk turns above the terrace, and some watching boy feels he has seen order itself made visible. Even if you doubt the metaphysics, the choreography persuades a vast country breathing together for a moment, courtesy binding fear into something useful. And yet the palace keeps its shadows. Petitioners bring not policy but cures. A new claimant to hidden knowledge arrives each fortnight with a scroll and a smile. Courtiers hire private fangshi to advise when to speak at council and when to bite their tongues. The emperor's patronage has made knowledge a currency of favor. Good men are drawn in, so are wolfish ones. A single falsified miracle can sour a decade of careful credence, and chroniclers will note the stain. In this mid-reign glow, you can already glimpse the paradox that will define Wu's legacy. Occult arts promise to weld estate and cosmos into a single circuit, so that the empire hums and the sovereign's years lengthen. The same circuits carry panic at the speed of rumor. Talk of dolls and curses can curdle into a purge. The emperor knows the danger, but he does not wish to live without the promise. His genius lies in making the rites magnificent enough to satisfy reason and hunger alike. His flaw lies in believing that magnificence can guarantee sincerity in those who perform them. For the moment, the balance still appears possible. The stove god is honored, the fasts are kept, Mount Tai has witnessed, Tai is pleased, calendars and campaigns seem to march to the same drum. The emperor tastes dew and chastened, refuses the jade. He praises elixirs and warned pauses. The court, quick with hope, calls this prudence and prays it will last. Soon, however, charismatics bolder than Li Shaojun will arrive, men who promise not atmospheres and alignments, but miracles, here and now, with proofs the eye can see. One of them will step from the southern state of Chu, claim traffic with immortals, and climb from commoner to marquis in a season. His name is Luan Da. His ascent will be dazzling. His fall will be sudden. He comes to court at a tilt, like a comet bright, fast, leaving a wake of breathless talk. He calls himself a knower of hidden methods, a courier from places where mountains swallow the moon. The registers will later write his name plainly enough, Luanda. His origin story shifts as swiftly as his fortune. Some say he walked up from the humid south with a bundle of talismans. others that he rode in with merchants and kept his hood low. What matters is what he carries in that bundle of vocabulary that fits the emperor's desire like a key in a lock. Not merely alignment, he promises, but access. Not a season of favor, but a hand held across the threshold to the immortals themselves. The court has seen wonder workers before the precise physicians, the quiet mathematicians, the ascetics with breath like winter pines, but Luan Da arrives with theater. He knows the registers of the palace the way a new name spreads through a corridor faster than a draft. The ache for proof that chants itself in the mind of a sovereign who has already climbed Mount Tai and felt the sky listen. He speaks the idiom of correlative cosmology fluently. He can map organs to planets and points on the wrist to river bends, but he always slides toward the promise at the center, a body able to slip the gate of decay. If Li Shaojun offered a careful diet and clean breath, Luan Da offers an appointment on a peak where immortals wait with cups of jade dew. The emperor tests him as emperors do lavishly. He lets resources pool around his guest until the man's claims either float or drown. Within a few weeks, Luan Da moves from waiting room to inner chamber, from audience to companionship. He receives a seal, then a marquisate, then, astonishingly quick, a marriage into the imperial line, officials who have weathered 10 winters to move a single rank watch as the floor lifts beneath this stranger. Even the chronicler, usually a cool hand, lets a flicker of disbelief show through his brush honors, estates, precedent-defying favor, all in one breath. What does the palace see that justifies this climb spectacles? Certainly performances that raid the senses and leave the heart hammering. A screen pulled across a darkened hall becomes a trembling boundary. Strange light blooms with no visible flame. A breath of fragrance moves like a spirit through the watchers. Luan Da stands very still, speaks very softly. They are near, he says, as if remarking the approach of rain. Someone in the back hears a whisper that cannot possibly be anyone's human mouth. Another night, a small brazier is charged with a powder that burns blue and cold, the smoke running along the floor like a brook. When a talisman is laid over it, the ink brightens as if woken. A girl serving wine drops her tray with a chiming crash because she has seen, just there beside the pillar, a hand wearing an antique ring. The court's artisans, watching with professional eye, notice more than the breathless do. They mark the cleverness of layered screens and reflected lamplight. They smell gums and resins that carry unfamiliar notes, perhaps rare woods, perhaps perfumes distilled from storerooms meant for sacrifice. They see how a ribbon tied at a particular height can make a draft's presence visible. In private, they talk about phosphorescent powders that take light and give it back ground from shells or minerals brought from the coast, and about the way patience can make anything miraculous if the audience is hungry and the performer knows where their hunger lives. Still, spectacle alone does not curry such favor. Luan Da is careful. He steps forward with a doctrine that sounds respectable when repeated at council. He speaks of the great one's attendance as civil servants in a higher court, of petitions dispatched upward by correct timing and sincerity. He frames each demonstration as the faintest shadow of a greater truth he will unveil when the emperor, by fasting and rectification, becomes fully eligible. The bait is hope, the hook is procedure. The palace, which already loves procedure, swallows. In the wake of his rise, budgets and bodies rearrange themselves. A new apothecary room is built near an inner court, its shelves latticed, its jars labeled in a hand so neat you would trust it with your pulse. Porters carry in cinnabar sealed with wax, mica in pages that glitter like frost, stones crudely smelted from remote furnaces, herbs with names that promise rain in the lungs. Young scribes are seconded from the historical bureau to copy charms in vermilion and cinnabar ink. Carpenters carve new altars with edges that cast precise shadows at the equinox. Seamstresses stitch robes with constellations, embroidered so fine the threads disappear unless lamplight strikes them just so. The palace seems to tilt around a new axis. What was once side labor becomes center stage. Envy clots in corners, so does fear. To be seen near Luanda is to court either windfall or ruin, and the boundary between the two shifts like a mirage. A minister speaks too boldly against him and finds his petition returned with a cold note about insufficient reverence. Another, deciding the hedge, invites one of Luanda's lieutenants to a private dinner and places before him a silver lamp in the shape of a cloud. Within a week, that minister's nephew has been placed as an assistant in the imperial library. The economy of favor learns a new currency. Men who never thought of the breathwork of immortality now practice it in gardens at dawn where anyone can see. At intervals, the emperor asks for proofs that do not rely on sense and screens. Letters are written for delivery to the immortals, careful things, trimmed and folded, sealed with kingfisher blue. Luanda takes them, returns 3 nights later, and lays before the throne an answer a slip with a phrase the emperor himself used only once, years ago, spoken to no one but a now dead favorite. The court looks at one another as if a cold wind had crept up their sleeves. Later, an understeward will confess that he remembers the favorite's maid. What she knew, others could have known. On another occasion, a small copper vessel is filled with clear water. Luanda breathes over it. A whisper of steam rises and, they swear, organizes itself into characters that melt before any hand can reach to touch them. An artisan watching carefully will notice a dusting of something along the rim that could have been softened with the right oil. It is not that the emperor cannot imagine trickery. He has watched a charlatan's pulley work exposed and ordered him killed. But he is tired of charlatans because he is fond of the idea that there are also saints. Luanda has made the latter feel probable. The emperor is willing to pay in titles if that probability can be nursed into certainty. Meanwhile, the rites continue. Calendars are still composed. Sacrifices still rise toward heaven. Border reports still arrive. The empire cannot stop to evaluate every light in a dark room. It holds its breath, and in that held breath, Luanda thrives. Then comes the moment that every performer fears the ask that cannot be deferred. Produce what you promise. The rumor is that Luanda argues for time further purifications, retreats to consult. The project of eternity, it says, is a matter of years, not weeks. The emperor's patience is long, but not infinite, and impatience has a way of drawing out critics who speak in tones that even a believer cannot ignore. A minister from an old family who has survived 3 purges chooses his words with needles. If the immortals are so near that their fragrance fills our rooms, surely they can be prevailed upon to leave a token, not a vision, majesty, but a token that can be weighed. There follow days of hurried making. In a side court, a carpenter and a lacquerer, men who have never broken the law, find themselves complicit in an attempt to fake the unfakeable, a feather that does not burn, a ring that passes through the wrist and leaves no wound, a blossom that will not fade and then on command falls to powder. There are ways to make such things behave once, twice. There are almost ways to make them behave before 10 witnesses who will swear mercy or ruin, but almost is no good before an emperor who, in his sharper moods, can tell when a candle flickers the wrong way. The exposure is not theatrical. It is a series of small discoveries laid on a tray, a hidden cavity under an altar step, a drawer of prepared tokens behind a panel that should have held a scriptures, a boy servant who, under questioning, breaks into tears and says he was told to breathe through the reed because the god's voice needed air. No one sentiment governs the room when the truth pools like oil on water. There is the emperor's rage, there is his shame, there is relief in the eyes of those who feared the court had slipped its footing for good. There's also a shadow of grief for a world where the impossible, for a breath, seemed punctual. The punishment is public and fast, the marquisate unstitched, the marriage dissolved in the only way a marriage at that height can be, by blood and decree. Luanda, who yesterday stood on the inner terrace with a princess's hand in his, stands now in the place where all adjunct genius stands when it fails to perform. The year is recorded 112 BCE. His body is made an example. The palace looks away and looks back and decides to speak of prudence again. Debris remains after any spectacle ends. The apothecary jars do not seal themselves. The cinnabar does not walk home. The young scribes trained to copy talismans must make peace with the steady ink of the legal code. The carpenters who laid out altars calibrated to equinoxes return to measuring furniture for dowries. Favor detaches itself from certain names and reattaches to others. For a while, courtiers speak in cool voices about the difference between orthodoxy and excess, about how the Feng and Shang rites establish order while conjuring corrodes it. They want to believe there is a bright line. They want to believe they have found it again. The emperor, bruised but not defeated, issues orders that circle the wound reign in illicit sorcery, investigate mediums, watch marriages that bring ritual specialists into noble houses. Each command sounds administrative, and each is also a penance. He knows that his appetite cleared space in which Luanda could bloom. He cannot renounce the appetite without renouncing the model in which heaven answers. He chooses instead caution and the deadening comfort of procedure. There is safety in the solemn public rite. There's danger in the private promise whispered over a brazier at night. The caution will not last, not because the emperor forgets, but because human fear and hope never go out of season in palaces. When illness leans on him, when dreams turn small and cruel, when dolls and curses are rumored in his storerooms, and the air seems filled with thin whipping sounds, he will reach again for means to steady the unseen. The court, having taught itself that wonders can be staged, will see plots where there are only shadows and shadows where there are plots. What began as a market of marvels will tilt toward a hunt. For now, though the lamps burn steadily, the stage has been struck. The audience, embarrassed, sits with hands folded. Someone coughs, someone laughs once, sharply, and is silent. Somewhere in the palace, a scribe closes a file on Luanda and writes a new header, Witchcraft Persecution's Commencement. At first, it is a dream, and in the dream, the emperor is not a man, but a surface. Over it scurry tiny figures, mannequins, with stiff arms and thin sticks whipping. He wakes with the sensation of lashes on his back and a pulse in his throat. A sovereign's dream is not his alone. Within a day, the chamberlains have told the secretaries. Within a week, the words witchcraft and curse move through the palace like smoke that will not lift. In the autumn of 96 BCE, Liu Che, Emperor Wu of Han, orders a thing that bureaucracies do with terrible competence and investigation. It does not begin as a frenzy, it begins as paperwork. Edicts go out to the commanderies and kingdoms, a search for illicit sorcery, seize dolls and curse tablets, examine altars behind walls, question mediums, root cutters, private feng shui. There is even a cadence of reasonableness in the language. If so, then confiscate. If not, abstain, but the pages fall into hands eager to show diligence, and a chain of incentives clicks into place. The crime named is an invisible one. Proof can be lightweight. Zeal looks like loyalty. The machine starts to run. Teams of searchers spread through the capital and the provinces with lists and standardized questions. They carry shovels and inkstones. Houses are opened and turned inside out. Courtyard dirt is sifted for buried evils. Bamboo slips with cramped writing. Lead figurines pierced with needles. Charms in cinnabar tucked under thresholds. Bundles of hair and nail pairings bound with red thread. You can make such things in an hour. You can plant them in a minute. You can find them where you have planted them with perfect punctuality. When no token appears, the absence can be read as proof of cunning. The accused are brought in with bound wrists. Informativeness earns leniency. Silence is obstinacy. The panic quietly calibrates itself. Within weeks, the court has what it asked for: reports, arrests, confessions under pressure, confiscations paraded in baskets. Ministers who had enemies discovered that old slights are now mortal risks. Women who kept private domestic altars, half medicine cabinet, half comfort, are hauled before magistrates and asked about verses they cannot read. Mediums who healed fevers with a drum and a chant sit in chains beside clerks who once copied calendars. The empire that recently tuned itself to heaven with measured rites is now listening for harm in every whisper of the unseen. Rumor functions like an escort service for the law, ushering it to doorways that would otherwise be closed. In the flood, names begin to surface that cannot safely be spoken and cannot safely be ignored. The imperial family is not immune to fear. Proximity to power attracts accusations the way oil attracts dust. By 91 BCE, a single official's ambition will catch the current and steer it toward the center. His name is Jiang Chong. He has survived long by reading winds. Now he produces a gale. Jiang Chong's plot is audacious in its simplicity. He plants evidence dolls, talismanic scripts inside the quarters of the heir apparent and his mother, Empress Wei. Then, with a prosecutorial flourish, he discovers what he has arranged and enters the palace in righteous heat. Dolls with needles are lifted with pincers. Red ink charms are unrolled with grave faces. Accusations are matched to the very words that twitch in the emperor's fears. Witchcraft has the advantage of being an invisible offense with visible props. A prop is easy to fabricate. A counterproof is almost impossible. Word reaches the crown prince, Liu Zhu. He has watched the court tilt before, but this tilt is aimed at his neck. He is a son trained to patience and ritual. He's also a man who can read the arithmetic of panic. If he allows the evidence to stand, procedure will proceed, and procedure is death. So in a city that has learned to treat portents as policy, he chooses the bluntest policy left to him. He arms men loyal to him and strikes at Jiangchong first. The rebellion is born of fear, not appetite. It breaks out inside Chang'an with the clatter of gates, the scatter of citizens who do not know where safety lies, and the brief, terrible clarity of a single act that feels like self-defense and will be recorded as treason. Jiangchong is found and killed. For an hour, those who loved the prince let themselves imagine that cutting the thread at its source will halt the weaving. But witchcraft panics do not unravel when you tug at a single knot. They have already thickened into a fabric of suspicion that can be thrown over any figure, large or small, and made to fit. The emperor, fenced by alarms and misreports, does not see his son's desperation as a last, worst recourse. He sees a palace in flames. Troops loyal to different ministers take streets in knots, then in lines. Smoke rises from markets. The prince's proclamations hurried, honorable, insisting on the frame-up cannot outrun the speed at which calamity defines itself. The revolt is crushed with that special ruthlessness that comes when the state defends the sovereign against his own blood. Thousands die in the choking heat of summer. The line between a search warrant and a massacre proves shorter than anyone imagined. History keeps a few details and erases most. It keeps enough to teach the shape of grief. The crown prince, cornered and spent, dies by his own hand. Empress Wei follows into the same dark. Their faction is wiped clean with a bureaucrat's efficiency lists, arrests, property registers revised in a clerk's tidy script. The palace corridors smell of vinegar and ash from the purifications ordered afterward, as if a wash can rinse a stain from the air. The emperor learns in fragments who struck whom, who stood where, what order was misunderstood, what letter was never delivered, and in the long ache after certainty, he recognizes that the fire fed on fuel. He himself stacked a court, acclimated to wonders and terrors, a jurisprudence invited to prosecute the invisible, officials who learned that the quickest route to attention is to promise mastery over what cannot be seen. Later chroniclers will say that remorse took hold of him in those final years, that he issued edicts to halt the excesses, that he punished some of those who had written the panic hardest. He names a new heir. He retreats into procedure the way a man retreats into a walled garden after bandits have passed. The garden is familiar calendars, sacrifices, propriety, and that familiarity feels like virtue. But remorse cannot unkill. It can only adjust the balance so that the living can breathe again. If a court wanted to avoid such a fever, what should it have done? The question is academic and urgent. An invisible crime overturns ordinary burdens of proof. under normal statutes, you need a deed, a witness, a thing. Under panic, you need only a suggestion and an object that looks like intent. The more the estate seeks to standardize the search, the more it grows hands capable of lifting any mat and calling what lies beneath a curse. Accusers are rewarded, informers multiply, paper begets paper. The gentry learns to burn small altars before they are found. Commoners learn to say nothing to men with brushes. The search for safety makes neighbors illegible to one another. It is also true that witchcraft panics a scale unusually fast inside palaces, because palaces are built of correspondence. A sovereign's mood is a climate. If he dreams of tiny sticks and feels whipped, the bureaucracy translates that feeling into patrols and edicts. If he feels soothed, the same bureaucracy sets down its shovels and writes agriculture reports. The legal scholar in any age tells the same cautionary tale where the offense cannot be shown except by subjective tokens. Procedure must be colder, not hotter. The temptation in emergencies is the opposite. Emperor Wu was, by training and temperament, a man of procedure and offerings. In his prime, that gave the empire coherence. In his fear, it gave the empire a speed. And yet, to pause on fear alone is to miss the second magnet. In the compass hope, the same reign that staged witch hunts staged the most beautiful rites of its century. The same mind that signed arrest warrants also climbed Mount Tai to stitch earth and sky. It is this ambivalence that late Han writers will remember with a wince a court that believed too much, a court that believed too little, a sovereign who could be grandly pious in public and catastrophically credulous in private. The lesson most later monarchs will claim to learn is caution. They will consult, but not surrender. They will patronize alchemists and astrologers, but raise a skeptical brow. They will keep a fence between spirit work that frames order and sorcery talk that shreds it. The fence will not always hold, but it will exist. In the days immediately after the revolt's suppression, as officials pick through rooms still sour with smoke, a clerk tasked with updating the verifications column on an old divination register harvests, floods, eclipses, results, stops, and lays down his brush. The empire's tidy habit of matching judgment to outcome has met a calamity that cannot be logged as auspicious or ominous. He closes the book softly. Somewhere, an old ritual master draws a talisman against nightmares, folds it small, and burns it in a cup, a private rite against a public wound. The emperor sleeps again, and if he dreams of puppets, no one writes it down. From this chamber of shadow, the story steps back into light, not because the arts recede, but because their uses are revised. The court will still watch stars and wait days. It will still order winds with drums and offer wine to heights. But after Han, sponsorship will be more measured, Tang emperors with alchemists, Song emperors with a spirit writing, each remembering the fever of 981 BCE, like an old scar under a sleeve. The lesson does not kill the longing. It teaches rulers to keep longing on a leash. After Han, the empire keeps breathing, and when it breathes, it counts. Omens are logged, winds felt, eclipses copied neat as needlework into the court's registers. The panic that consumed the crown prince becomes a cautionary tale cited in polished sentences, but no dynasty can live on caution alone. Rulers still need heaven's attention, villages still need rain, families still want their dead at rest and their doors quiet. The state grows wary of conjurers and yet funds ritual calendars. It distrusts private marvels and yet pays men to listen for the sky. The lesson taken from Emperor Wu is not abstinence but moderation, a fence raised between the rites that frame order and the excitements that unmake it, a fence mended and broken and mended again across centuries. In the Tang, that broad-shouldered age when poetry walks arm in arm with policy, the court invites Taoist adepts to advise and sits them near the engineers. The logic is practical. A rite that aligns human time with cosmic time can steady a border as surely as a levee. On certain nights, a small furnace glows within a side court, its bricks darkened to the color of old tea. An alchemist in plain robes adjusts the bellows, adds a pinch of mineral that crumbles like sugar, seals the mouth of the vessel with clay. The recipe promises refinement of matter, of breath, of fate. He's not a carnival man, he's a technician inside a cosmology where gold's incorruptibility is not metaphor, but instruction. When an emperor drinks a pellet dissolved in wine, he does so not as a dupe of glitter, but as one persuaded that the world's map of correspondences can be coaxed to run through a human frame. The risks are on record. More than one sovereign will sicken after ingesting mineral elixirs. Courtiers will whisper that immortality hurries men toward death. The state responds with regulations that sound like a stern father's constrain workshops, test ingredients, license adepts, condemn reckless refining. The condemnations never quite close the furnaces. Hope returns each spring like a weed that smells faintly of cinnamon. Meanwhile, the Astronomical Bureau keeps its own fires, instruments on rooftops, clepsydras ticking, officials comparing notes about the skitter of Mars or the curl of a comet's tail. If a drought presses, drums sound across the capital, and the emperor presents himself in plain cloth to ask for rain. The choreography is sober, repeatable, legible to a country that likes to see its ruler demonstrate humility before forces larger than any band of soldiers. The Tang is also the moment when Buddhism and Taoism learn each other's steps more closely than before. Esoteric Buddhist rituals, Dharani spells, fierce deities who promise protection if invoked correctly, enter the Chinese repertoire. Taoist liturgists watch attentively and refine their own thunder rites, talismans, and exorcistic formulas. A monk recites a Sanskrit syllable that rattles like a jeweled chain. A Taoist priest composes a petition where the characters march like soldiers. In the next county, a village medium beats a drum until his breath runs in front of him like a dog. Each claims a technique for bringing the unseen to heal. Each borrows the other's furniture when it proves sturdy. If the Tang court makes a room for alchemy, the Song gentry builds a study for spirit writing. The instrument looks like a toy, almost a small planchette, a forked stylus of wood held by two mediums over a tray of sand or a bed of sifted ashes. The deity invoked is often sober and local, a city god, a stern immortal with a practical voice. Questions are posed, the stylus moves, a line appears, then another. The strokes gather into characters that the host copies onto fresh paper. The air smells of resin and tea. At the end, a brief treatise has emerged, a moral admonition, a village rule, a poem so plain it sounds like a proverb. In an era of exam halls and paper money, of canals and magistrates who pride themselves on clear edicts. Fuji planchette writing feels like the supernatural answering in a bureaucrat's tone. This literate occult fits the Song temperament. The state's faith is in documents. The deity, when present, learns to draft. Temples keep archives of spirit-issued rules. Neighborhoods read them aloud when quarrels threaten to split a lane. Families copy them into house manuals between recipes and seasonal reminders. A spirit-writing session can be a gentle theater of order. Elders arrive skeptical and leave with a page that seems to pin down an anxiety where the Han court chased phantoms. The Song household produces legible obligations: pay the temple fund, tend the bridge, watch the well in drought, do not beat your ox on festival days, superstition, say the critics, administration by other means, say the defenders, and point to lower thefts and calmer nights, geomancy. Meanwhile, feng shui matures from instinct to instrument. A master stands with a luopan, a compass ringed with bands of characters and trigrams. The top, an encyclopedia pressed into brass. He reads the veins of a hill, the flow and curl of water, the way a house takes the wind. He speaks of dragon lines, great currents moving under earth and city, and of how to let a door drink auspicious air rather than bleed it. The metaphors are alive enough to instruct a carpenter: move this lintel, shift that eave, plant a stand of bamboo to catch the teeth of the north wind. You could throw a net of skepticism over the formulas and still find that the house sits easier in a storm. Astronomy becomes a profession of civic pride. The Southern Dipper is watched not only for omens, but for the precision of calendar announcements that farmers in distant counties depend upon. Instruments improve sighting tubes steadier on their mounts. Armillary spheres trude until a star can be nailed to a circle with a single breath. Within the bureaucracy, the tension remains: purge the courts of private sorceries. Yes, but never starve the offices that measure the sky. A well-kept calendar is a soft exorcism against chaos. From outside the cynosphere, the contrast sharpens. In much of medieval Europe, occult is the neighbor of forbidden, an alley that church court patrol with zeal. High magic survives in enclaves. Low magic is a witch's risk. In China, the same impulses, divination, healing, auspicious timing, are more often domesticated than banished. Officialdom scolds, licenses, and repurposes. It rarely declares total war. There are crackdowns, yes, when a sect grows too confident or a rumor cuts too near the bone. But the prevailing posture is managerial. The empire does not so much deny the unseen as expect it to serve. This expectation produces curious hybrids. A Song magistrate will open court in the morning with a lecture on statutes and adjourn in the afternoon to consult a spirit-writing altar about a dispute that law cannot neatly solve. A wealthy clan will hire a lettered Taoist to plan a burial site and then endow a charity granary as thanks to the city god who oversaw the process. A merchant will keep a ledger and a talisman in the same drawer. To modern ears, this can sound inconsistent. To Song ears, it is coherence, one cosmos. Many tools. Regulation has its own sacral rhythm. Edicts move like tides, a stern order against licentious rites. When a drought fuels desperate offerings that block streets, a gentler rescript a season later that recognizes the same rites under a new approved name. The state's irritation is less theological than administrative. Do not clog the alleys. Do not fleece the poor. Do not claim powers that thwart the calendar. But let the drum sound on the proper night. Let the lanterns burn if they keep a ward from quarreling. Buddhism and Taoism, still eyeing one another, continue to trade furniture. A Buddhist monastery hosts a bonfire rite that smells suspiciously like a thunder god ceremony. A Taoist temple copies a sutra into its register because the deity who sponsors talismans is also soothed by the cadence of a dharani. The people who come for help do not police these boundaries. They ask a monk for a water blessing and a Taoist for a house charm and a village medium for the date of a wedding. And when each gives, they fold all three into the same pouch of gratitude. Through all this runs the memory of Han's fever. Tang poets joke darkly about dolls. Song essayists warn against trusting wild men with narrow eyes, but both ages accept, more than they deny, that aligning the human with the patterned world is a noble craft. The desire to connect altars and seasons, breaths and stars never quite grows old. The estate's task is to prune aberrations without killing the root. In good years it manages, in bad years the pruning knife slips. Here we must do a historian's shuffle. Chronology would carry us forward to later courts, but our story's backbone lies with a figure who stepped aside from office in a century of disunity and wrote patiently about all these arts, convinced that salvation was a craft that could be taught and learned. Before Tang's thunder rites and Song's planchettes, before the Luopan's neat circles, he thinned his own circle to a mountain's horizon and mixed medicines by a furnace as modest as a peasant's stove. His name will be our compass now, Gehong. We will go backward to go forward, down a southern road where herbs smell bitter. Mercury gleams dangerously in a dish, and the scholar writes with the calm of a man who expects to live long enough to revise. The century into which Gehong is born does not promise quiet. Northern capitals burn, banners change color, river crossings become borders overnight. A studious child in the lower Yangtze, he learns his characters under a roof that shakes with rumors. A Confucian primer opened before him, while elders speak in low voices about refugees from the north and the year's bad portents. He will grow tall and spare, serious in the eyes. He will carry two inheritances that do not, to him, feel contradictory: the exam room's love of order and the family legend of adepts who walked very near the wind. One name in his house is spoken with pride and a touch of awe: Ge Xuan, the great uncle, said to have conversed with the immortals. The story is not footnoted, it is cherished, and it gives the boy's curiosity a direction. If one can both govern well and live long, why would a good man choose only one? He will be called by a courtesy name, as gentlemen are Jichuan, and he will serve in posts that do not reach the top rung, but are real enough to learn how files smell when rain threatens the granaries. He rides with troops in anxious seasons, learns how disorder lands first in the belly-spoiled stores, interrupted harvests, the fever that ripples through a garrison. He never wholly abandons the public path. He understands why Confucius stitched together ritual as a fence against panic. But each year that the frontier speaks of fire, he feels the other inheritance tug. Order is good, perhaps order is not enough. The body itself could be steadied, tuned, extended. Breath could be taught to listen. Substances that do not rot might teach flesh their stubbornness. Mentors appear as if a road had been cleared for them. Jingyin, Jing the hidden. Men call him, shares recipes and cautions in a tone a clerk would trust. The lessons are not swoons, they are steps, each explained. Fast this number of days, or the next will be useless. Keep records. If you claim to have seen a god, ask what you ate. Error is usually in the diet. Ge Hong copies, compares, stores, corrects. He does not wish to be fooled by his hunger. He will later write as if to disciples. But the earliest notes are the private workshop of a young man trying to keep two loyalties office and transcendence free of one another's hypocrisy. War squeezes him south. He is not alone. Whole registries of families, the marrow of the northern literati, follow the river into safer provinces. In their luggage, they carry calligraphy tools and the habit of calendars. In their mouths, the names of mountains where sages dwelt. The south is humid and thick with green. It smells of resin and mineral rain. In those hills, caves breathe like animals and stones bleed colors that grow scarce in the north. If you were a seeker who needed a furnace, a stream, a neighbor who did not ask questions, and a horizon without watchtowers, you would stop when you saw Mount Luofu long-backed, cloud-swaddled, and say here. On Luofu, he makes a life that is both austere and busy. He builds with his hands, because hands remember when philosophy forgets. A hut that drinks the morning wind. A furnace lined with clay that has the right bite when you press it. Shelves for jars, their mouths wax sealed, their bellies labeled in a neat script cinnabar that glints like small sunsets. Real gar, an orpiment whose beauty warns. Mica that shivers into pages fine as fish a skin. Roots that smell bitter as rain-wet bark. Herbs that carry mountain cold even when dried. Visitors find him plain in speech. When asked if he has seen immortals, he answers like a man asked whether he has seen the wind yes and no, and what matters more is how you set your sails. The book he writes there will wear his sobriquet as a titled Baopuzi master who embraces simplicity. It is a promise and a warning. The promise is that he will take the high tangled forest of techniques and cut a path that ordinary feet can walk. The warning is that he will not flatter. He will speak against fashion, against shallow cleverness, against the laziness that wants a charm when the body needs discipline. He divides the work because divisions help busy minds' inner chapters for doctrine and the long climb toward transcendence, outer chapters for society, policy, learning, the behavior of scholars who say they love the way but cannot settle their debts. The cuts are rhetorical. In the end, it is one book, because for him, it is one world. Hold the book to the light, and you will see the range of his appetite. He writes about immortality, yes, but he refuses to be coy about its roots. External alchemy widen, where minerals are refined, combined, sealed, heated in cycles that mirror the year, where the practitioner treats the furnace like an instrument that can be tuned to play the notes of the 5 phases. Internal methods, breathwork, visualization, the stabilization of essence he respects as well, and he will not allow their exponents to sneer at those who tend fires. Medicine sits nearby, not as a separate aisle, but as a neighboring art to know which herb names a demon in the blood and which nourishes a dried river inside the lungs is part of the same grammar. Demonology appears too. Without romance, pests of the unseen have habits. Name them, interrupt them, ward them, do not play with them. Talismans and seals belong, but they are not toys. If you must travel through tiger country, by which he means forests, illnesses, bad years, carry the right sign and do not brag. It would be easy to paint him as a romantic of retorts and hills, but the Baopuzi's voice is that of a clerk who loves clarity. He argues in numbered points. He anticipates objections. He quotes authority and then corrects it with an observation from his own practice. You say elixirs are dangerous, he writes in the tone of a magistrate. So is eating spoiled grain. He's not blind to hazard. Cinnabar's glow draws fools. Mercury is a patient killer. Arsenic will sit quietly and then speak once, fatally. But his prescription for risk is not fear. It is method. Know your sources. Purify properly. Test small. If a teacher cannot tell you where his minerals were dug, do not swallow what he hands you. If a formula has no pedigree, make it for ants before you make it for men. Do not attempt mountains before you have learned to walk plains. Thus, the ethic, he hopes, will reconcile his two inheritances, a civil servant's caution, married to a seeker's daring. The world around him changes faces as he writes. Northern refugees make cities, in the south clever and crowded. Markets blossom with new tastes. Scripts pick up regional turns. Monks bring texts on their backs across passes that would break a lesser back. In this mix, Gehong's mountain does not feel like withdrawal so much as a laboratory near a port. Couriers arrive, letters arrive, apprentices arrive with questions that carry the scent of county offices. Some stay, take notes, leave for posts, and write back, Master. The drought is sharp. Which charm under which star, Master? Which diet when the fevers come after flood? He answers without fuss, but those pages harden into chapters. He is building an archive of usable wonder. He does not conceal that he wants more than health. He wants release from the ordinary arc of decay, not denial that bones will one day be laid down, but a measured cheating of time through harmony. To him, immortality is not a tantrum against death. It is a normalization of what is possible when a person's breaths, actions, favors, and refusals are brought into tune with the pattern that holds peaks up and draws dew out of air. It is why he writes about ethics as well as pills. The man who will not keep faith cannot keep breath long enough to refine it. Thus, the southern turn in his life becomes more than a biographical fact. It becomes emblem and method. The South is a workshop of resilience. Its mountains require care. Its herbs teach patience. Its seasons train the skin to notice. He gathers local lore with the same calm with which he handles classics. A fisherman's tip about a plant that loosens a cough sits beside a master's recipe for treating cinnabar, and he does not feel the dignity of one harms the other. In the Baopuzi, you can feel an empire re-knitting from its edges, knowledge climbing back up the trunk from roots that did not die when capitals did. The book's title keeps returning like a refrain. Embrace simplicity. It is less a call to rusticity than a call to severity. When others embroider, he cuts. When others chase a fashionable vision, he asks about results. A simple furnace, well sealed, a simple schedule, strictly kept, a simple bed, cool in summer, warm in winter, where sleep can repair what fasting and experiment wear thin. When he writes about adepts who claim to fly, his tone is unenchanted. When he writes about a poor family who strengthened a boy's lungs with a bitter decoction, his tone warms. The Baopuzi keeps a ledger of miracles. Yes, but its accounting favors steady gains. If we left him now, pen laid aside, you would already recognize why later ages will carry his name forward. He offers an economy of the unseen that the magistrate can love recipes with sources, talismans with sizes and inks specified, admonitions that fit on a household wall. And yet he does not let the craft shrink to mere technique. In every chapter runs a chord of aspiration, the belief that the human can be refined, that the world is not indifferent to that refining, that longevity is not hoarded by gods but available to those who accept a discipline that binds appetite and action to a patterned sky. He is neither cynic nor zealot. He is a patient man who keeps notes. We will open the Baopuzi more fully in the next, turning into its ladders of art, its travel protections, its insistence that the lower arts are roofs for the higher. For now, keep the image of the mountain and the desk, of jars labeled in a neat hand, of a furnace pinking in the dusk. A scholar who did not abandon the world so much as rebuild a small, serviceable version of it on a ridge above the trees, and then invite others to copy the blueprint. Open the Baopuzi, and you do not find the cloud chaser's size. You find a staircase. On the lower steps, Gehong sets what he calls the near-at-hand arts medicine, divination, exorcism, talismans, protective methods for travel and illness. Higher up, he places the steeper work, refining elixirs, reshaping the breath, firming a spirit until it can endure like metal in a rain. He refuses to sneer at the ground floor. Build the foundation, his voice implies, or the upper rooms will kill you. In his world, a man who can name a fever's demon and break it, who can read an omen and adjust the hour of a journey, who can hang a seal to quiet a haunted threshold, is not dabbling. He is aligning himself with the grain of the cosmos so that the sharper tools, furnace and breath, will not cut him to the bone. Begin with the lower tier. He treats medicine as a craft of correspondences, heat and cold, dryness and damp, winds that gnaw and stagnations that fester. Roots are catalogued not as folklore, but as instruments bitter to drain heat, sweet to nourish, pungent to move the stuck. He pairs these with a circumstance, the season, the patient's constitution, the place, because a remedy is not a pellet in a void. It is a negotiation between a body and a sky. When he writes of demons, he does not always mean a personified malice. He means the thing in the blood that behaves like a pest unseen, capricious, repelled by the right noise or smell or sign. You can collate a poison with herbs. You can also interrupt its habit with a ritual that teaches the body to shrug. Divination sits beside medicine without embarrassment. To ask is not cowardice, it is good scheduling. The farmer who consults for the hour of a sowing, the trader who chooses a date to cross a river, these are practitioners of risk reduced to art. Gehong prizes the habit of recording outcomes if you judged it auspicious and the harvest failed. Write that down. If you called harm and none came, note it, learn. The Baopuzi tones the wonder out of omen reading and plugs it into administration. The past is a ledger. The future should listen to it. Then the warding arts. Talismans and seals are not fancy paper in his hands. They are contracts in a cosmos that runs on registers. A charm brushed in cinnabar is an instrument with specifications the size of the paper, the grain of the brush, the stroke order that makes the character march as it should. The ink matters a cinnabar for its yang stability, soot for its humility, because a charm that blots is a petition that stutters. He advises redundancy, a seal above the lintel, a packet sewn into the traveler's sash, another burned, and the ash drunk in warm water when fear climbs the throat. The point is not to turn life into a superstition museum. The point is to give danger fewer places to stand. His travel pages feel like a guide for a young official posted to a hard county. When you pass tiger country, he writes, carry a blade of peachwood, the soft, spirit-bright timber long used for apotropaic tools. Fix a mirror at your chest, for bright bronze is said to disgust lurking things. A flash in the dark can be as loud as a shout. If the path narrows under cliffs, strike iron and recite, because metals ring and breath measured into syllables draw a circle around the heart. He is not above practical country lore, either hang real gar at the belt in summer when a snake's astir, keep ginger for cold rivers, cleanse with mugwort a smoke, when miasma, the bad airs of wetlands and rot, lays a film over the skin. The page smells of resin and caution, not of theater. He says plainly why all this matters. Adepts die in mountains, not only for lack of food or because their stoves leak mercury. They die because they forget that the world is busy with wills not their own. A man who tends a furnace and ignores exorcism may build the roof before the walls. A woman who fasts to fast and scorns medicine may invite a fever demon that no purity can throw off. The Bayopuzi keeps case notes careless seekers stumbling into caves and losing their minds. Proud men with red lips and bright eyes, classic signs of cinnabar intoxication, pronouncing themselves immortal 2 weeks before their fingernails turn black. If you wish to live long, he says, without cruelty, do not lie to yourself about what you can endure. Climb, then, to the upper tier. He will not let you skip. External alchemy Waidan demands an artisan's steadiness. Furnaces are built like arguments. The clay must cure, the lid must seal, the vents must draw. The ingredients, cinnabar, real gar, orpiment, gold, mica are prepared with a sequence that mirrors seasons. The heat cycles as a year does. The vessel is cooled as if it were a living thing that could take offense. He knows the poison like he knows the promise. Mercury is mercurial because it does not bind easily. Bind it wrong and it will bind to you. He offers protocols that sound like a magistrate's test on small creatures before you taste the edge of the recipe yourself. Watch the tongue and the pulse. If insomnia and agitation come, stop. A failed adept in his book is not a martyr to mystery. He is a craftsman who ignored a gauge. Where Waidan works from matter toward a spirit, inner work breath and visualization works from spirit into matter. He speaks of guarding the one with uncommon clarity. The one is not a trinket held in the palm. It is the gathered, centered attention that sets an inner lamp steady. He teaches an ordinary posture sight as if a bowl of water rests on your head, and you will not spill it. Place thought on the space behind the navel, the cinnabar field, and breathe as if filling a bellows. Slow enough to teach the pulse to forget its panic when fear crowds in a demon shrine, a plague house, a tomb, a tiger's path. Hold the one. The outer air will not immediately sweeten, but your mind will cease to offer itself to every shadow. In that quiet, he says, ghosts become less gifted, and your feet find their cunning again. The physiology he implies is practical rather than mystical. The body in his pages is a house with furnaces and windows. The lower field is a cauldron. The chest is a hall. The head is a tower worth guarding from drafts. Breath is fuel raw, invisible, measurable by its effects. He is not mapping nerves, he is mapping usefulness. When he speaks of circulating essence through channels, he is not so much describing gray anatomy as giving a carpenter's plan if you breathe this way. Heat and calm will sit where they can do the most good. Between the tiers, he builds bridges. A talisman is more reliable if the writer has sat and steadied. An elixir is less likely to disorder the heart if the heart already knows the path back to quiet. Medicine works better in a patient who guards the one. Exorcism works faster for a man who has trained breath to arrive when called. You begin to see why he resists the sneer that calls one set low and the other high. Stones protect when you wear them. A gracious breath protects when the stones run out. In the mountain night, he says, without saying it, take both. He is at his most humane when he writes about failure. Many adepts poison themselves, not because the way is false, but because they are in a hurry. They despise the small arts. He notes meaning medicine, talismans, omens, and then die of a preventable fever under the pretext of chasing a great one. Others memorize incantations, but will not boil water long enough. Others intend to refine gold and do not first refine their greed. His antidote is not contempt, but curriculum. He hands you a course of study, learn to live, learn to ask, learn to ward, only then learn to fly. If you find yourself aging while studying, count your breath and be grateful. You're doing the work correctly. He will allow stories the kind that make beginners lean forward. A traveler wearing a small packet of treated cinnabar crosses a ravine at dusk. A shape in the trees watches and does not step nearer. A medium, armed with a peachwood sword, starts a drum in a village where children have been sleeping badly. The drum pulls the fear out of the rooms like a thorn. Afterward, the elders hang a mirror at the alley's mouth and the night's ease. A young clerk who carries a road charm sees a snake turn away when he steps down. He writes to thank the master. The master replies that gratitude is well, but next time the clerk should watch where he puts his feet. Even in marvels, the Bao-puzi keeps its humor dry. What binds these pages is not a hunger for the marvelous, but a pedagogy of survival that rises into grace. Lower arts keep you alive long enough to attempt higher ones without bravado. Higher arts repay the patience by turning life's basic repairs, healing, warding, asking into channels through which a steadier spirit can move. The ideal, glimpsed in quick strokes, is not a firework that stuns, but a lamp that does not go out when the wind rises. When later generations call Ge-hong a master, they mean precisely this. He refused glamour in favor of a ladder anyone serious could climb. He would have smiled politely at a sage who boasted of flying and asked if the man had learned to keep a fever from the lungs. He would have placed the boast and the cough on the same page and answered both with a recipe. In the next turning, we will see him make an ethic of this, the way he binds Confucian duty to Taoist daring, the way his handbooks seeded whole schools of practice, the way his biographies of transcendence kept a human face on the miraculous. For now, Close the book with the sound a well-fitted lid makes on a warm furnace, a seal, not a slam. The point of Geihong's project is not merely that a person might live long, it is that living long should make moral sense. In his pages, a Confucian's habits filial piety, measured speech, public spiritedness are not obstacles to Taoist questing, but prerequisites. To preserve the body, he argues, is itself a filial act parents gave it. You honor them by tending what they handed down. To abandon society irresponsibly is not transcendence. It is a breach of ritual. Thus the outer chapters, with their tart criticisms of fashionable learning and shabby ethics, braid to the inner chapters, where breath is refined and furnaces are sealed. Duty and daring are not enemies. They are left and right feet. Walk with both or you limp. You can feel the same ethic in the way he organizes stories. The Shengxian Zhuan biographies of divine transcendence does not merely entertain with marvels. It offers case law. In these lives, the wondrous is patterned, not random. The adept who feeds the hungry, restrains appetite, keeps promises, and practices with steadiness gets results that bend weather and illness. The one who seeks shortcuts usually dies prettily and early. The book is humane in a way some manuals are not. It notes that saintliness has varieties. One immortal is bracing and severe, another wry and companionable. One thrives in court service and retires late. Another keeps to a mountain before middle age. All share a stubborn, practical tenderness toward life. Read 3 biographies and you begin to hear the pedagogy behind the fireworks. Cultivate virtue because it makes technique safe. Learn technique because it lets virtue endure. We tend to imagine such collections as rarefied objects, but the Shengxian Zhuan was a busy book. In a scriptorium behind a county temple, apprentices rubbed ink and leaned over fresh copies, lips moving as they traced characters. In a scholar's salon, a host read aloud a tale of a rainmaker who would not eat until the well was open to the poor, and the listeners nodded, the lesson clear beneath the marvel. A traveling ritual master, hired to cleanse a sick house, kept a worn fascicle in his sleeve, both charm and credential. We practice in a line. Stories circulate more widely and longer than decrees. They teach village boys what to expect from adept and charlatan alike. They teach officials, when panic rises, what kind of wonder to fund and what to forbid. The line that runs forward from Geihong is not a straight road. It is a chain of mountain paths that find one another by scent. In the 5th and 6th centuries, Tao Hongjing, scholar-physician hermit, climbs a ridge in the southeast and makes a desk at Maoshan. There he compiles, edits, and orders the revelations and practices that will take the name Shangqing highest clarity. The revelation corpus is visionary texts, meditations, deities mapped inside the body's palaces, starry bureaucracies, but Tao's handling of it is as calm as Geihong's. He annotates with a pharmacist's care, sets rubrics for transmission, calibrates visions so that they do not turn the mind to smoke. If Geihong taught a generation to treat immortality as craft, Tao Hongjing shows how a received heaven can be rendered serviceable to households and monasteries without dissolving into private delirium. Under his hands, the airy becomes legible. A temple can keep a register. A local lineage can be trained. A county can know which scripture to sponsor in drought and which to read in mourning. The Shang King turn changes more than texts. It shifts the balance of method. Where external alchemy once carried prestige, inner exercises now grow tall. The human body, with its 3 fields and circulating breaths, becomes the furnace, the heart, steadied by visualization, the sealed vessel. Heavenly palaces are visited not by feet on paths, but by an attention trained to walk through the chest without getting lost. Ge-hong would not have quarreled. He had already insisted that a charm works better in a quiet heart, a pellet more safely in a tempered body. Tao Hongjing's apparatus gives that insistence institutional shape. Communities at Maoshan and beyond copy handbooks, teach novices, write to sponsors. The mountain's outputs are not only saints, they are schedules and commentaries, things that can be carried to a market town and used. By Tang and Song, the drift reaches a name needed inner alchemy. The old correlations survive metals answer stars, planets answer organs, but the furnace has been moved inward, the bellows made of breath. Practitioners speak of refining essence into breath, breath into spirit, spirit returning to emptiness. It sounds abstract until you sit down and do the work, eat moderately, sleep cleanly, guard the one, let the mind's teeth unclench, keep counsel with teachers who can tell whether your glow is health or fever. Manuals preserve the craft's decencies. They repeat, in their own idiom, Ge-hong's cool advice: do not rush, do not haunt extremes, do not mistake agitation for illumination. A later master will say it plainer if your practice makes you cruel or strange to those you love. It is a bad practice, however bright your eyes. Quanzhen emerges centuries later from caves and courtyards in the north, with Wang Chongyang sleeping in a tomb and then coming out to teach. The discipline he builds is startlingly sane for a school born in visions, precepts against greed, lust, and falsehood, meditation that prefers simplicity to fireworks, charity and service, a monastic regimen that looks, at a glance, like the clean bones of Confucian propriety dressed in Taoist breath. The 7 realized ones, his first disciples, do not merely charm emperors, they open routes between hermit cliffs and market lanes. If you stand at Wudang or in a northern monastery and listen to Quanzhen instruction, you can hear Ge-hong's voice and Tao Hongjing's quiet edits beneath the bells. Technique softened by ethics, ethics extended by technique. In the Jin and Yuan courts, where Quanzhen teachers counsel rulers, the lesson becomes administrative, again patronize the austere, reward the helpful, distrust noise. The chain matters because it made the arts usable. A single adept in a cave can be beautiful. A tradition that can be taught in a village hall is a public good. Texts moved accordingly. Before block printing, copying rooms kept the pages alive. With printing, handbooks traveled at the speed of patronage. County temples set aside a corner for shelves. Literati collected these manuals as eagerly as they collected poetry. Merchants, who liked reliable calendars and decent funerals, paid to have clean editions carved. A local gazetteer might include a page of talismanic forms adjacent to the bridge repair budget. A family compendium stitched together recipes for winter coughs, proper burial orientations, and a few spirit-writing admonitions from a temple down the road. In each case, the occult was not hiding, it was being formatted. The traffic was two-way. Monasteries shaped practice, but households enforced it. A ritual master who learned a new exorcistic sequence at a mountain retreat returned to his district and trimmed it to fit a single street village with a shallow stream and no bell. A clan that had lost children in a bad summer did not need a treatise. It needed a talisman that a grandmother could draw at dusk and paste above a lintel without a tremor in her hand. Manuals obliged terse diagrams, few words, sized to memory. The best of them carried the tone that Gehong bequeathed: firm, lucid, minimally mystical. This is how a cosmology remains civil, by giving the anxious something decent to do. Literati salons served as a second engine of transmission. Between poems and politics, friends read out lives from the Shangxian Zhuan and debated whether so-and-so's charity counted as a merit in the arithmetic of transcendence. A host displayed a new edition of a Shangqing scripture with margins wide enough for notes. A guest told a story of a Quanzhen monk who halted a brawl by refusing to argue and refusing to leave. Someone's daughter, listening in the next room while servants refilled cups, learned that it was possible to admire wonder without losing the thread of the day's obligations. These small domestic audiences matter as much as palaces do. They decide which practices feel respectable, which feel embarrassing, which can be asked of a son-in-law without reddening the face. The result, over centuries, is a layered public in which occult arts sit near the center of order rather than at its edge. A magistrate can approve a temple grant because the temple keeps a famine register and conducts rain rites on the correct days. A scholar can respect a ritual master who turns in neat accounts. A grocer can attend a spirit writing session without feeling he has defected from reason. When excess appears, as it always does, the tradition has its own correctives ready. A Gehong voice reminding that lower arts save lives. A Tao Hong Jing hand annotating what is fantasy and what is safe. A Quanzhen precept cooling greed. The estate, alert to panics, finds that a well-taught people are easier to govern than a restless Puritan one. The alternative, severing the arts, tends to drive them underground, where rumor breeds faster. If you squint, you could say that Gehong never truly left office. He moved the desk to a mountain and widened the brief. His legacy is this administrative tenderness toward mystery, a refusal to treat the unseen as an excuse for either lawlessness or scorn. It is why later adepts could keep both a ledger and a furnace, why monasteries wrote receipts with the same hand that copied talismans, why villages, in hard years, could make use of both prayers and schedules. It is also why the world of marvels did not vanish. When philosophy turned sober, it had been made legible. From here, our path leaves mountains for parlors. The ethic survives, the scenery changes. In late imperial Shandong, a scholar who never quite found his way through the examinations gathered hundreds of tales in which foxes fall in love, and priests haggle with demons, and a beggar coughs up a heart. He wrote as if telling jokes across a brazier. He wrote to keep wonder neighborly. His name is Pu Songling, and his strange tales will prove that in a literate age, the occult can be most persuasive when it smiles. Let's sit at his desk next. On certain Shandong evenings, when the wind folds the reed beds and the brazier blinks like a sleepy eye, a scholar lays down his brush from copying the analects and reaches for other paper, the kind that invites foxes to walk in and sit. He is Songling, failed repeatedly by the examinations, yet sharpened by them into a listener. In his modest studio, he keeps a ledger of marvel stories heard in tea houses, at ferry crossings, from servants who swear they saw what they saw, from county clerks with a taste for gossip, from peddlers who sleep rough and know which lanes go cold at night for no good reason. He does not despise his sources. He arranges them. He tidies the wonder until it reads like a moral. He calls his little room Liao Jai, Studio of Leisure, and he packs it with nearly 500 tales whose very brevity makes them quick and durable, like charms slipped into a sleeve. Pooh belongs to the Confucian gentry by aspiration and temperament, but in the decades after the Ming's fall, the path to office feels as narrow as a comb's tooth. He studies until his eyes ache, fails until his heart does, and turns, almost in self-defense, to the busy underworld of rumor and proverb. Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio is his rescue boat and his needle. He steers through corruption and cruelty by making demons stand for them, and he stitches a modest garment of justice where officials could not or would not. His narrator is a bluff, humane presence. The idle old man of Liaojai, who laughs, shivers, raises a skeptical brow, and, when the story requires it, nods toward heaven with a seriousness that makes the room quiet. If you leave his pages, you begin to learn the manners of a supernatural society. Fox spirits fall in love with scholars and refine them with affection and wit. Monks and Taoist priests show up like blue-collar heroes, patient and knowledgeable, walking into the scene with wooden swords at their belts and a refusal to be overawed. Minor functionaries from the underworld take a clerk's pleasure in paperwork and deadlines. Justice is braided with tenderness. Ghosts who were wronged in life are given a final sentence that reassures the living that memory has teeth. The greedy find their mouths filled with ashes. A household that shows courtesy to a spirit will be made lucky in the small ways a child's fever softened, a lost ring turned up near the well. Pooh's best-known tale is the one that threaded itself into the language so completely that its title became an idiom for deception, painted skin. He sets it not on a far mountain among saints, but in an ordinary city not far from his own, to remind you that terror loves the familiar. A scholar named Wang leaves his gate one morning and finds a girl by the roadside, weeping. Her clothes are torn, her story, bullet quick, a wicked family, a flight in the dark. He brings her home because he believes himself good. His wife receives the stranger with wary grace, sets food on the table, makes a bed in the women's quarters. The girl's gratitude is mild and practiced. That night, she breathes like a human being sleeping. She eats by day like a sparrow. Wang's pity flowered quickly into desire. His desire, as desire does, makes him blind in the tidy ways that are easy to excuse. The house shifts around the new sun at its center. Wang invents errands that keep him close to the guest. The wife learns to quiet her hurt with work. Neighbors gossip, then fall silent because the scholar smiles and the gate remains handsome. Days coil. A Taoist priest comes through the quarter one afternoon, a familiar figure in these stories, rough cloth, clear eyes, the calm of a man who has seen worse and lived. He glances at the house, frowns at the air as if there were a rot he could smell. Inside the entry, he meets Wang and asks a few questions, that serve only to put courage in place of courtesy. There is an evil presence, he says. Do not let politeness kill you. He writes a charm, vermilion on yellow, and tells Wang to hang it above the bedroom door. That evening, the illusion breaks. Wang, half in shame, half in curiosity sharpened by fear, peeks through a crack and sees what Pooh intends to burn into the reader's mind forever. The girl sits before a screen with a stretched skin laid over it, pale as paper. She has hung her human face like a mask upon a peg. Her own face is green, feral, slick with a varnish of something that glistens in the lamplight. With neat, indifferent movements, she lifts a brush and paints the skin with delicate strokes, tracing brows, lips, the faint rose of cheeks. Then she presses the thing over her own head, smoothing the edges, and becomes, in a breath, the lovely creature the neighborhood was whispered about. There's a logic in it. Illusion is maintenance. Beauty is a job done at close range that steadies the horror. Wang staggers back and does not scream because his disbelief still hopes for rescue by denial. The priest's charm is hung above the door. The demon sees it and shows her true strength. She hisses like a wet log cast on a fire, tears the charm, and, in a leap, tears Wang's living heart out of his chest. Pooh does not linger over it. He is less interested in gore than in the consequence that follows the wife keening. The house suddenly too large and too empty. The slick stain on the floor like a signature. The demon is gone before any neighbor's feet cross the threshold. The woman does what Pooh so often has women do, everything that must be done while the men despair. She finds the priest. He tracks the demon to an old woman's lean-to at the edge of the city, because monsters love to borrow the plainest masks. He fights not with thunderbolts, but with instruments. Readers recognize a peachwood sword, a mirror flashed in the thing's eyes, a roll of talismanic papers that fly like white birds. The fight is noisy, practical, almost workmanlike. He cuts the demon down and peels away the foul painted skin, rolls it like a rug, and throws it into fire. Justice smells of char. The priest is done, but Wang is still dead, and Pooh knows his audience will not let him end there. The priest sends the wife on a second errand. This one is stranger than the first. In the marketplace, he says, there is a beggar whose mind is not a beggar's. Go, and if he is eating, let him eat. If he spits, save what he spits. It is very nearly a joke, and Pooh knows how near comedy sits to divinity in a hungry city. The wife finds the man, a filthy figure who mutters at birds and laughs alone. She begs him until he sighs and spits a clot of phlegm onto the ground. When the wife's hands hover, he waves go on, and the phlegm becomes a small, pulsing heart, obscene and holy as all salvations are when they arrive from impossible hands. She wraps it, runs, and presses it into her husband's chest with the help of the priest. Wang breathes. His blood returns. The house is a house again, but with a scar cut through its future, where credulity used to sit like a guest of honor. It is an exorcism story with a moral ledger. The demon is punished. The fool is corrected. The faithful are rewarded, and the city is reminded that evil often wears a careful face that must be painted on daily. Painted the skin from then on is what one says when a facade is felt to sit too neatly on rot, a shop that brightens its lamps while cheating on weights, an official whose poetry is excellent and whose bribes are rich, a smile that does not reach the eyes. The tale's afterlives prove how tightly Pooh braided craft and feeling. It leapt into opera, where clappers and wooden swords made the priest's work audible. It has been filmed more than once with the pleasures and anxieties of new eras mapped onto the old story. It is cited in essays when a century needs to name hypocrisy without naming names. The core remains Pugh's illusion thrives by habit, virtue requires tools, rescue often arrives from the person everyone overlooks. Around Painted Skin, the collection arranges stories that keep turning the same keys in different locks. Priests and monks are often the fixers, but they are not magicians in the gaudy sense. They are craftsmen whose knowledge steadies a community. Fox maidens are not merely temptresses, they are moral instructors whose tenderness corrects a scholar's dryness. Bureaucrats from the underworld are not surreal decorations. They are a reassurance that paperwork follows souls as faithfully as it follows taxes, and always Pooh's social eye gleams corrupt men mocked from behind a screen. Loyal wives given the dignity of action. Poor people allowed a triumph that tastes like a bowl of hot rice after a night in the wind. Pooh Songling did not overthrow a system. He tended consciences with his stories. He restored proportion by showing that the occult, properly handled, is not a door to delirium, but a practice of justice in a world that has forgotten how to calculate it. If Ge Hong gave a manual for survival and transformation, Pooh provided a companionable voice for evenings when the lamp burns low and you need to be reminded that a priest could knock on your door tomorrow and make sense of the noise. From his little studio, the ghosts stepped out into operas, picture books, movies, and idioms, and they have not yet found their way home. Head south until the hills warm and the air takes on the sweet metal smell of incense, and you will find a different register of the unseen louder, nearer, ablaze with color in Fujian's market towns and the coastal flats of Guangdong, in villages that face the Taiwan Strait, and in harbors where junks used to crowd like geese. The gods do not wait to be inferred from a line of text. They come walking. A festival afternoon can feel like a street becoming a throat through which a voice passes. The medium's title is easy to remember in the local tongue tâng-ki, child Ji. The body lent and the work is equally direct. Let a deity borrow your limbs so the neighborhood can be healed and kept. Before the drums, there is a room, a low shrine in a side lane with red paint rubbed silky by hands, floor swept with a care that says, this is also somebody's living. The main altar is crowded the way a family table is crowded on holidays. Mazu's serene face set in the middle like a mother. Guandi's square jaw and blade to steady the men. The three pure ones a little higher to remind everyone that order breathes. Sometimes a princess sorceress from local legend, sometimes a plague king whose temper, if appeased, keeps fevers out of the alleys. Along the walls hang the emblems of the 5 camps of the Celestial Army banners for the directions, the colors, like a compass sewn from silk. Near the door sits the earth god in his small chair, because all business begins by greeting the landlord. The tâng-ki arrives without pomp, a shopkeeper on other days, a mason, a man whose neighbors know how he takes his tea. The assistants have set out the implements, a rattan chair, a small brazier, iron combs, A bundle of swords with edges kept duller than pride would admit. A brush and a dish of vermilion. Someone brings a bowl of water. Someone else checks the first aid box modernity. Even here is a careful ant. A swana wails one long note, bright as a wire. The drum answers with heartbeat that grows a spine. The tâng-ki takes off his shirt. He is not theatrical. He is attentive, as if listening for a footstep in the next room. The change comes as a collection of small breaches, eyes losing their focus and then fixing on a point no one else can see. The spine loosening as if a second balance had been found, the breath turning ragged and then deep, like a bellows that has learned its job. Assistants tie a sash at his waist, both to hold him and to show respect. On good days, it is quick, like a lamp catching. On harder days, the body bucks against what is arriving. The deity who steps in is always named afterward in a tone that is half report, half gratitude. Marshal Wen, perhaps, or Prince Neja, or a general under Mazu, sometimes a plague lord whose courtesy, when in a human body, is a relief to everyone present. The tâng-ki leans forward as if bracing into a wind, and when he lifts his head, the neighborhood breathes with him, because a voice has arrived that can be asked questions. Proof is a language the crowd knows. A sword is drawn. The blade bites the tongue. The blood that comes is wiped onto yellow slips of paper already marked with characters that zigzag like lightning. The slips are folded, touched to incense, burned. The ash is tipped into the bowl and drunk by the woman whose child has coughed at midnight for weeks. The tâng-ki presses a heated iron against his flank. It sears and does not mark. The assistants smile because the god has seeded well today. He climbs a ladder whose rungs are blades, the drums keeping exactly the pace at which a man can believe his feet will hold. A quick series of slashes lays stripes along his back. No wound opens farther than a red wheal. The crowd exhales, the way a crowd does when a high wire walker makes the middle of the span between feet. The work that matters most happens in close. A shopkeeper leans forward awkwardly, embarrassed by an affliction that belongs to the ordinary body. The god answers with the brusque patience of someone who fixes 100 stoves a week. A mother asks about her son's exams. The brush scrawls a charm with a few coarse characters, and the assistant explains that this is not a pass to heaven, but a reminder to sit down early and eat warm rice. The family that moved a grave without consulting anyone admits to bad dreams. The tâng-ki names a day and a small rite with oranges and wine and an apology to the earth god. The room is loud, but the advice is always about quieting a life. Keep the kitchen clean before the 7th month. Do not slaughter on the day appointed to wine. Hang a mirror where the alley bends. Forgive your cousin before the festival, so the smoke will lift in one column. It would be easy to dismiss the self-wounding as a spectacle until you remember what a community needs from a borrowed god. Pain is a grammar lesson here. If the deity endures without injury, then the neighborhood's injuries can be endured and undone. Modern doctors in the crowd wince and recognize the risk management at work, edges dulled. Assistants watchful, wounds washed in strong liquor afterward. The shortest routes to the clinic kept clear in heads that also know the names of local saints. The right remembers older tricks, peachwood blades, iron rings, the taste of realgar in summer, but it is not frozen. A box of sterile gauze sits under the altar table, like a wink at history. The gods are not offended by bandages. Scholars would trace the ancestry of these rites back to the old Yue peoples of the south, the shamanic pulse still strong in a region where mountains keep to themselves and rivers change their minds often. Later, Taoist liturgy lent furniture and vocabulary. The Taoist thunder books stroked into the air, the 5 camps with their banners, the solemn petitions read at the start of a procession, so the agencies in heaven know who is doing what, under which license. Buddhist neighbors shared their own tools. The sight of a monk's water blessing or a dharani tied to a palanquin is no contradiction. In the shrine's corner, you might see Guanyin's calm cheek turned toward the same street that Mazu watches over. Syncretism here is less a policy than a lived courtesy if 2 hands bless. Both are welcome. When the festival swells beyond the room, the city feels it. A palanquin that carries Mazu's image rocks like a small boat on the shoulders of men who know how to make wood dance. Firecrackers run like stitching through the alleys. Gongs mark the beat that carts and feet can keep. The god rides to bless the precinct, to taste the dust of the lanes, to be seen by old women who cannot climb the temple steps anymore. At certain corners, the procession stops to face the sea, and the god is turned so she can listen to what the water has to say about storms. At night, the lanterns fall into long chains that stream across bridges. A child on someone's shoulders discovers that light can behave like a river. Exorcism, when needed, is handled with drama that knows how to end. A plague boat, a wooden miniature of a ship, may be built, named for the king whose patience with crowds is limited, loaded with the neighborhood's written afflictions, and walk through their streets so the sick can see their breath leaving with the smoke. At the final field, the boat is set alight. If you swear the ash made the air taste clean afterward, no one laughs at you. The point is not to terrorize evil, it is to drain it off politely, with courtesy and noise. The gods here are not courtroom judges. They are captains of health departments with banners. The diaspora carried these habits like sourdough starter. In Taiwan, the tâng-ki is a regular neighbor. In Singapore and Penang, the Hokkien Quarter's calendar carries transnights and palanquin tours. In Bangkok and Phuket, the 9 Emperor Gods Festival summons processions that make tourists pale and old men nod. In each place, the local ground supplies new companions. Malay guardian spirits greeted with Chinese courtesy. Thai neighbors who offer jasmine that sits comfortably beside a stick of incense. The grammar holds. A body is offered, a god comes near, the neighborhood asks and is answered. Languages multiply. The heart keeps its single beat. What does the medium remember afterward? He blinks as if out of too bright a room, drinks sweet tea, eats something salty to call his blood back. The assistants dab wounds with liquor, whisper jokes, behave like younger brothers after a father has put down a heavy load. The tâng-ki often says he remembers little. That is not always evasion. Borrowing is tiring. Some speak of a dream of wind, some of a pressure at the back of the neck that lifts like a hand removed from a child's shoulder. He goes home slower, a human again, carrying a body that has been both an altar and a tool. Tomorrow he will open the shop and argue about the price of nails. Across north and south, there are many ways of asking the unseen for help. The southern style's genius is immediacy. It makes heaven legible to a port town in the time it takes to light a brazier. It shows children that the gods can be carried in wood, and that wood can be made to move like a living thing. It asks harm to announce itself so it can be cut. In a century that doubts theater, it insists that some fears cannot be talked out, they must be walked on. And when the drums stop and the smoke blows east, the street finds itself ordinary again, but cleaner in some hard-to-name way, like a room after sickness, where the windows have been thrown open for the first good day. Tomorrow, the drums will move farther inland, and the accent will change. The North prefers liturgy and association, masks and scripts, sects that preach and promise, ritual masters who inherit a book and a seat at the village temple. The noise is different. The gravity is the same. We will go there next, to the dragon kings and the temple committees, to the fox household altars in the northeast, and the planchettes that draw words in ash. For tonight, let the last thing be the tâng-ki asleep, a red stripe fading on his back, a mirror on the altar catching one late car's headlamps and returning them as a small bright answer. Head north and the air thins to a different clarity. The lanes widen, the winds have a longer run-up, and religion steps out of the back room and into the village square with a steadier tread. Where the southern coast loves the shock of divine nearness, the god borrowing a neighbor's body, the north prefers ceremony that looks like a law. The temple is not a side shop, it is city hall. Boards of elders keep ledgers, incense money becomes bricks and roof tiles. The ritual calendar reads like minutes from a meeting that began before anyone alive was born. If you came here after a Fujian trance night, you'd feel the change the moment you saw the temple courtyard swept like a parade ground and the altar laid out as if for inspection. At the center is the village association, a committee of surnames that rotate responsibility for festivals and repairs. Their priest is not usually a possessing medium, but a ritual master, a fasci whose authority runs in families like a trade grandfather to son. He keeps a chest of hand-copied liturgies and a sword with the gloss worn thin under his grip. On festival mornings, he dresses not for shock, but for recognition. Robe, seal, cap. A man who could officiate births and exorcisms on the same list, because both are entries in a ledger the temple keeps for the living and the dead. When pestilence threatens, he does not bleed on paper. He reads from a book a century old, and the book reads him back, insisting on vowels and steps that make sense of fear. The pantheon here keeps older faces in clearer focus. The dragon kings, responsible for rain and river, receive the most visits, so do earth lords, city gods, and guardian spirits who rule over irrigation gates and hill passes. In some districts, mythic founders, Fuxi with his net, Shenong with his basket of herbs, Pangu prying heaven from earth sit on side altars like portraits of grandparents no one living met, but everyone thanks. The difference matters. The North, whose villages yoke multiple surnames to one square, gathers its gods like a council whose job is to keep fields and lanes legible. The South, whose cults often grow from lineages, prefers a god who knows your mother's voice. Both systems work. They simply breathe at different tempos. Watch a northern exorcism, and the choreography tells you what the people trust. The fasci arrives with assistants who hoist a screen and set a brazier. A boy fetches a drum that will steady older men's hands. Masks carved to a fierce calm are lifted from a shelf, where they sleep between plagues bearded, fanged, their eyes wide as if to shame what hides. The master steps the pattern is 7 stars, 9 palaces, the old cosmographic grid traced with shoes that have walked this courtyard since boyhood. A wooden sword cuts the air. Talismans blaze briefly and dissolve into ash that someone will stir into water without ceremony. The master names the pest by its formal title, because in the north, the unseen has rank and therefore duties. When the rite closes, the village's sense is not of a horror vanquished, but of a docket cleared. A drought teaches you more about the style than a fever does. Imagine a year of hard sky. The canal shows its ribs. The elder who keeps the rainfall logs has been shaking his head since spring. The association convenes under the locust tree. They decide to ask, and they decide to ask properly. The Dragon King's sedan is lifted from its shelf, veiled, and set on broad shoulders. Children fall into step because children are democratic about processions. At the west gate, the Faji faces the horizon and recites a petition as if reading out a memorial in court dates, deficits, the proper humility of a petitioner who knows he plows with heaven's water. The sedan sways because men's legs sway. Drums mark the pace that makes breath remain in bodies. Paper fish are torn and sent down a stream as if to tell the river it is still a river. A second petition is nailed to a post near the dry pond, when rain does come, as rain does. Eventually, no one claims magic, they claim relationship. The village asked with a grammar learned from grandparents. The sky answered in its time. The account books will record both. It is not all public squares and committees. In the northeast, the borderland where Han, Manchu, and Mongol histories braid shamanic currents run close to the surface. Foxes move through houses there with the casualness of cats. Household altars for the fox immortal sit in bedroom corners behind modest curtains, a bowl of water, a little mirror, a dish for fruit, a red thread. To outsiders, it can look like superstition's pet. To insiders, it is a pact with a neighborly power who keeps business steady and sleep untroubled if respected. A grandmother tidies the altar at dawn, murmurs a courtesy. An uncle places a stick of incense before signing a contract. A girl, frightened by dreams, pins a charm under her pillow and tells no one. The fox accepts gifts and gives favors. If treated rudely, it is said to borrow a voice in the night and say rude things back. A family with a fox altar will likely be thought lucky and a little uncanny. They will also be thought generous because in such economies, generosity is premium currency. Manchu shamanism leaves other fingerprints. A village keeps a woman who mounts a spirit sanction and cures illnesses that doctors cannot name. Her drum's beat is not the southern trance's wild tide, it is a measured summons, a knock on a door known to answer. She wears antlers for a moment and a scarf that means wind. She sings to call an ancestor who knows the forest's politics. She smokes the corners of a sick room with mugwort and a few syllables learned without paper. When the thing lifts, the patient's eyes stop skittering and fix. tea is brewed, the shaman laughs, suddenly ordinary, and asks after a nephew's gambling. The household pays with rice and a red envelope. It is less a transaction than a maintenance call. Literacy has its haunt here, too. Spirit riding Fuji drifts north with gentry tastes and finds rooms in which to behave like minutes from a meeting with a god. A planchette rests in a sand tray. Two men hold it lightly. A city god answers in characters that look like a diligent clerk's. The messages are brief and sensible. Do not divert water to enrich your field. Keep the night watch paid. Give the old bridge its repair when the ground is dry. A sect could do worse than be advised by a civil servant of the underworld. No one faints. Someone copies the result and posts it on a pillar. A grandmother who cannot read asks a literate grandson to tell her. And when he does, she nods as if reminded of something she already knew. Not everything the North nurtures is docile. The same talent for association and schedules produces sects with hymnals and handbooks, lay congregations that promise moral clarity and a clean end to the age's mess. The White Lotus currents run through centuries like a pale thread recitation halls, millenarian hopes, a calendar of fasts and simple meals, scripture copied by work-calloused hands. The 8 trigrams flare and fail and flare again, diagrams read as maps of crisis, chanted formulas that promise to steady the trembling earth. These groups borrow a little from every war and then add hunger for justice, for simplicity, for a heaven that will stop embarrassing good people. The state does not like hunger when it organizes. Officials watch for the moment when reading turns to drilling. When a hall becomes a barracks, then arrest records fatten. A sect that leaves the temple accounts alone and minds the poor can live quietly for a long time. One that recruits with clenched fists will be remembered in annals under headings that smell of smoke. It would be simple to write the North as sober and the South as ecstatic, but the truth is granular. Walk far enough west and you find Nuo rites, masked exorcisms that crack the air like winter cedar, as fierce as anything coastal. Walk far enough east in the north and you find a grandmother whose hands tremble when a certain god sits too close, and a great-grandson who brings her sugared haw to steady her after. The gradients matter because they show a culture that adjusts to weather and road as much as to edict. A temple that manages irrigation will feel more like a board. A shrine that keeps fevers in line will feel more like a clinic with drums. What holds across provinces is the persuasion that the unseen can be trained to behave. The fasci's sword is not a flourish. It is paperwork filed with the correct office. The Dragon King's parade is not desperation. It is a petition with signatures and seals. The fox altar is not a vice. It is a memorandum of understanding with a power who lives next door to luck. Even spirit writing, with its sand and stylus, is an agreement to keep conversation in a legible script. After the Han's fever and the Tang's furnaces and the Song's planchettes, this is the refinement the occult tamed to process without being starved of wonder. One night in Hebei, a dry storm pawed at the horizon and never broke. In the temple, the association met and did not argue. The fasci took out the mask that bit his face until he spoke like someone else. The drummer unrolled a skin and tightened ropes. A boy was sent to fetch the register so that the rain, when it came, could be logged cleanly. At the same hour in the northeast, a girl set a tiny dish of milk before a curtained corner and told the fox immortal about her mother's cough. In a county seat, a clerk pressed a planchette against a friend's palm and asked the city god if the bridge could wait until autumn. 3 prayers, 3 rooms. 1 habit, do not panic. Ask correctly, do the next decent thing. Tomorrow, we go up, away from temple boards and alley shrines, to mountains so steep they teach breath to speak, to Wudang and Qingcheng, Longhu and Hua, to hermits who turned austerity into a national ideal, and monasteries that stitched cave light into schools. The north and south teach communities how to ask. The mountains teach individuals how to change the person who asks. The road rises until a speech thins and breath begins to count itself. Pines lean into stone, water drops from ribs of rock with the patience of monks. Here the occult does not need lanterns or drums. It is the quiet arithmetic of lungs, the discipline of a lamp that will not go out in the wind. China keeps many such classrooms. Wudang, Qingcheng, Longhu, Hua their syllables like steps cut into ridges. Pilgrims climb with knees that complain and hearts that settle. A hermit's door is a shadow inside a cliff. If you call out, no one answers. If you wait, you hear a kettle bump once against iron and the slow scrape of a lid. The lore says the character for immortal Shen carries a mountain inside its strokes, as if to remind anyone who forgets that transcendence is a geography as much as a doctrine. The figures who come here are not escape artists so much as artisans of attention. They bring little a patched robe, a mat, a furnace the size of a child's drum if they keep to Waidan, or a body prepared to be the furnace if they practice Nidan. Food is sparse, not because hunger is holy, but because clarity is shy, and comes best when called by simple meals and the right air. Fasting from grain is a tool some adopt, not as a banner, but as a key that quiets the coarser appetites so that breath can be heard pacing the rooms. At Wudang, the cliffs fold into halls like sleeves. Here, inner alchemy grew into a grammar for swords and a stillness alike. Here, men traced circles with their feet until the ground seemed to remember them. Masters speak of marrow washing and the small heavenly cycle with the matter-of-fact kindness of carpenters. Tighten this, loosen that, do not clench the jaw, let the tongue rest where it knows to rest, keep the lamp of the mind low and steady. On storm nights, the mountain teaches without anyone's help, laying cloud under a moon until even the impatient understand what a changing hexagram looks like when it is weather. Qingcheng is softer, green to the edge of thought, a hillside that can make a recluse of an accountant by noon. Tales of highest clarity passed through its groves. Adepts drew maps of constellations they were sure lived inside the chest, chamber for chamber, palace for palace. The practice is unapologetically imaginal deities seated in the organs like officials in their offices. Breath sent as a courier between them, but its goal is a steady, to tether imagination to rhythm, until the body's storms obey a hand that no longer shakes. The gentleness is deceptive. Ask anyone who has failed to sit a full hour in summer with mosquitoes thick as prayers. The first immortality is not flying, it is staying. Longhu Dragon Tiger holds the old credential of the celestial masters, and with it, a reputation for registers and petitions. that keep both unquiet ghosts and unquiet towns in order. Nearby, less clerical adepts preferred dens and caves, tending furnaces behind walls that sweated mercury and hope. The mountain learned both kinds of footsteps, the pace of a priest who keeps appointments, and the pace of a seeker who will not be hurried into an elixir before he knows his own pulse. Outsiders imagine quarrels. The mountain remembers a long conversation. Ritualists handing down the schedules that villages could use. Recluses handing down recipes that the careful could survive. Hua is bright and hard, a ladder leaning straight into a sky. The pilgrims here earn their views with calves that will ache for days. Hermits make of the same steepness a filter the frivolous do not visit twice. Stories gather like lichen, a man who hung from a cliff by a belt to learn not to fear heights, a woman who slept on a board no wider than the hand to teach herself that comfort is not the same as peace. Most legends are scaffolds built around facts like these. There were people who did difficult things slowly for a long time, and their faces changed. The hermit's toolkit matches Gei Hong's ladder, but sanded to its grain. Lower arts are not despised. A mirror hung above a threshold, or a pinch of real gar tucked into a sash before crossing a snake-haunted gully is prudence, not superstition. A talisman burned and swallowed before walking into a plague house is, in a village winter, medicine with a signature. Higher arts are not theatrical. The small heavenly cycle is a patient circuit of breath around a ring the mind can learn to feel. The big cycle is its elder cousin. Guarding the one is a practice as simple and as hard as a candle kept steady while walking in wind. The rituals that count here are private, 10 breaths, counted correctly. A morning when tears arrive without a story and wash a long ache out through the ribs. An evening when the heart does not jump at a rustle in the leaves and the rustle goes on being leaves. Animal stories cling to such places because a person who sits still long enough becomes acceptable to non-human neighbors. A tiger once watched a hermit every dawn for a week and then stopped coming because the lesson was complete. A troop of monkeys learned that a certain old man's courtyard held nothing to steal and sat on the wall in a row like judges. When these tales are retold with smiles, the point is not cuteness. It is that the occult here is not a duel with nature, but a treaty. Beasts do not forget what calm smells like. Wind learns a person's name when that person stops burning himself as fuel. From this austerity, traditions returned to towns. Wang Chongyang, who slept in a tomb until the jokes dried up, came down from his caves not with fire on his head, but with precepts cool enough to place in a magistrate's palm. Quanzhen was born like that, a hermit's method translated into schedules, charities, a monastic rule that could survive winter. His 7 first disciples, the 7 realized ones, were not merely posters for piety. They were administrators of a rare sort, able to praise breathing exercises and also tell a donor that the temple had enough silk and needed grain. Under their hands, the mountain became communicable. An emperor, peering out from behind a screen, saw men whose powers did not warp their manners and offered patronage without losing sleep. From the monasteries, what had been cliff light broadened into civic habit. Wudang sent down a striking forms the world would later call taiji. Longhu continued to keep liturgical anthems so villages could ask for rain without breaking into panic. Qingqing kept up a conversation with householders about breathing that could be practiced in a doorway before dawn without incense or show. The occult became not a secret stash, but a public pantry breath, direction, auspicious timing, proprieties that softened grief, technologies of asking that gave fear something decent to hold. Into the 20th century and beyond, the thread did not break. Political storms sent monks down from ridges and they scattered mediums from their rooms. Some rites hid in the pockets of festivals. Some texts traveled overseas, rolled in bedding. Yet in the Dongyan Hills, you can still find a handful of recluses whose neighbors bring cabbages and leave without asking for miracles. In temple towns, the drum still beats when the rain will not come, and the priest still faces the Dragon King's image with a petition that sounds like a report because it is in apartments 10 floors up. A compass sits in a drawer to be consulted before a bed is angled. A red thread is tied to a pipe because someone's grandmother tied it once and the pipe behaved. In diaspora streets, Mazu rides on shoulders through Toronto and Tainan alike. A planchette whispers common sense in Penang. A palanquin rocks under neon in Bangkok, and a fairy horn answers across the water. If you return now to our opening distinction, China, where the occult is more public custom than private trespass, you can hear how the mountains complete the picture rather than contradict it. Courts and villages need rites that clarify what to do together, how to time a dam, when to carry a god through a street, what to write in a ledger after an eclipse. Mountains teach people how to be alone without collapsing, how to track panic down to its breath and give it a job. Between them, society learns to speak to the unseen in two voices, the chorus and the solo. The health of a culture can be heard in the way those voices refuse to drown one another. We have walked from shells heated at Anyang to palaces where emperors bargained with heaven, from persecutions that proved how fast fear rides to handbooks that taught steadiness, from a scholar's furnace on a southern ridge to a storyteller's desk in Shandong, from alleys where gods borrow bodies to squares where rain is petitioned with masks and drums, and at last to ridges where a person becomes a clear window the wind can pass through without rattling. At every stop, the work has been the same to make the world's pattern legible and to live inside it without breaking it. If you're listening at night, let the last picture be small. A hut on Wudang with a chip of moon caught in the window frame. Inside, a kettle size, an old man counts 10 breaths and smiles because the 10th is like the first. On the wall hangs a mirror for tigers and ghosts, and for himself a reminder that faces are painted every morning, and that practice is how you make sure your own is not a painted skin. Far below, a village sets a bowl of oranges on an altar, and a clerk writes down the inches of rain. Between the two, a country hums. What we have called occult is simply the human art of staying in tune with a responsive world, sometimes with drums and banners, sometimes with hardly a sound.